Tonight, let us think gently about a house that the world has judged too quickly. The house of the silver serpent and the deep emerald green. For 1,000 years, the name of Slytherin has carried a shadow, whispered as though it meant nothing but darkness, nothing but cruelty and cold ambition. Yet the truth is softer and far more interesting than the legend, and it is a truth well suited to a quiet night and a restful mind. So settle now into your pillow, and let your shoulders grow heavy, and let the day drift away from you like leaves upon slow water. There is nothing to do here but listen and breathe. Over the next 20 gentle chapters, we will wander together through the real story of Slytherin House, its founder Salazar, and the quarrel that shaped its name, its true values of ambition and cunning and loyalty, the crest and the cool green common room beneath the lake, the prejudice it never quite deserved, and the hidden heroes who wore its colors with honor. We will speak of Snape and Regulus, of Slughorn and Draco, of Merlin himself, and of why the Sorting Hat has always seen greatness sleeping there. There is no hurry at all. Let each word be a slow step downward into rest, and let sleep come to meet you whenever it wishes. 1,000 years ago, when the great forests of the north still ran unbroken from valley to distant valley, and when magic was something whispered rather than taught, 4 of the most gifted witches and wizards of the whole age came together with a single quiet dream, and one of those 4 was a man named Salazar Slytherin. They wished to build a place where children born with the gift could be gathered safely and taught with care, a place set apart from the fear and suspicion of the ordinary world. And so they chose a lonely stretch of highland beside a wide dark lake, and there they began to raise a castle out of stone and enchantment and long patient labor. The castle grew slowly, tower upon tower, hall upon hall, and it became the school we now know as Poudlard. And each of the 4 founders lent to it something of their own heart, their own values, their own understanding of what it meant to carry magic through the world. Salazar Slytherin lent his name to one of the 4 houses that would live within those walls, and he gave that house its colors and its emblem and its ideals, and those things would endure, carried forward from student to student for 1,000 long and turning years. From the very earliest days, Salazar sought out students of a particular kind. He was drawn to those who carried within them a certain quality, a certain steadiness of purpose, a hunger not merely to learn, but to become something greater than they had been at the start. He looked for the child who wanted to rise, who felt the pull of some far horizon, who was willing to think carefully and wait patiently, and work with great deliberation toward a distant aim. He believed that such children, once found, could be shaped into witches and wizards of remarkable power and remarkable achievement, and he wished to gather them together so that they might strengthen one another, sharpen one another, and carry the craft of magic to heights it had not reached before. This was the seed of the house he founded, and it was, in those first gentle days, a hopeful thing. A thing built on the simple faith that determination and cleverness were treasures worth nurturing, treasures worth guarding, treasures worth passing on with care from one generation to the next. The House of Slytherin, then, was not born in shadow. It was born in the same bright morning of the school as the other 3, in the same spirit of building and hoping and beginning, and Salazar stood among his friends as an equal and a founder, one of 4 pillars holding up a single roof. In those years, the 4 of them worked side by side, walking the long corridors they had made, filling the empty rooms with lessons and laughter and the first small crowds of students, and there was a warmth among them, a fellowship, a sense that together they had made something that would outlast all 4 of their mortal lives. Salazar cared for the school as deeply as any of them. He wished it to survive, to endure, to keep its treasures safe through all the uncertain centuries that lay ahead. And much of what he did, even the things that later ages would remember with unease, grew out of that same protective wish, that same desire to guard what he loved against a world he did not entirely trust. The other three founders each brought their own gifts to the shared work. There was Godric Gryffindor, bold and warm and generous of spirit, who prized courage above all other things, and who would befriend any soul who showed a brave and daring heart. There was Helga Pusufli, patient and kind and endlessly fair, who believed that every child deserved a place, and who valued honest labor and steady loyalty over cleverness or fame. There was Rowena Serdagel, brilliant and thoughtful and quick, who loved learning for its own sake, and who gathered to herself the curious and the wise and the sharp of mind. And there was Salazar Slytherin, the fourth of them, who valued cunning and ambition and the long, careful reach toward greatness, and who saw in certain children a fire that the others did not always see. Between the four of them, the whole range of human gift was covered: courage and kindness, wisdom and ambition, and the school they built was richer for having all four, for no single house could have held the fullness of what magic was meant to be. In the beginning, the four houses lived together in easy harmony, and the students of Slytherin mingled freely with the students of the other three, sharing meals in the great hall beneath the floating candles, sharing lessons and games and the long, slow seasons of childhood spent within stone walls. Salazar himself taught, and his students learned from him not only spells and enchantments, but a whole way of moving through the world, a way that valued foresight over haste, and thought over noise, and the quiet gathering of strength over the loud display of it. He taught them to look ahead, to plan, to see the paths that others missed, and to hold their true intentions close and calm until the right moment came to act. These were the lessons of the serpent, subtle and patient, and the children who took them to heart carried them out into the world when their school days were done, and some of them did great good with what they had learned. And some of them, in ages yet to come, would do otherwise. But that lay far in the future, unseen and unimagined in those first hopeful years. It is worth remembering, in the soft quiet of this telling, that history did not always treat Salazar Slytherin kindly, and that the name he gave his house came in time to carry a weight of suspicion and a shadow of unease. Yet the man who stood at the founding was not a shadow. He was a scholar of rare and formidable gifts, a builder, a teacher, a friend to his fellow founders, one of the four who dreamed the great castle into being. Whatever came afterward, whatever quarrels and legends and long misunderstandings gathered around his memory, the beginning was a beginning like any other, full of hope and labor and the ordinary warmth of people making something together. The house he founded began as a house of promise, of drive, of the wish to rise and to leave a lasting mark upon the world. And that promise, that first true meaning, has never entirely faded, however deeply it was later buried beneath fear and rumor and the slow accumulation of centuries. And so the castle stood, new and gleaming above the still dark water, and within it the four houses settled into their long life, and the serpent took its place beside the lion and the badger and the eagle, one green thread woven into a cloth of four colors. The students of Slytherin walked the same halls, ate at the same great tables, studied beneath the same enchanted ceiling that showed the moving sky, and they were, in those days, simply children, gathered and taught and cared for, growing slowly into whatever they would become. There was a rhythm to those early days, a gentle turning of ordinary hours, the ringing of bells, the gathering for meals, the slow drift of students through the corridors from one lesson to the next, and the greenhouse lived that rhythm alongside the rest, no different in its daily life, no set apart in its simple childhood cares. This is where the story begins, at the founding, in the quiet company of 4 friends and the great school they raised together, long before any quarrel divided them, long before any legend gathered, in the soft first light of 1,000 years ago, when the house of the serpent was young and full of hope, and had not yet learned to carry the weight of the world's fear. Rest here a moment, in that early morning of the castle, and let the founding settle gently over you. The 4 founders, the rising towers, the greenhouse newly made, all of it calm and distant and at peace. Behind the great legend of Salazar Slytherin, behind the centuries of rumor and unease that gathered around his name, there stood a real man, a witch's son and a scholar of the old world. And to understand his house, we must first sit quietly with him, with the person rather than the shadow. Salazar was a man of rare and formidable gifts, one of the most accomplished witches or wizards of his entire age, a master of many separate branches of magic at a time when such mastery was uncommon and hard-won. He had studied deeply and long, gathering knowledge the way a careful collector gathers treasures, and there was little in the magical arts of his day that lay beyond his understanding. When the 4 founders came together to raise the great school, it was in part because Salazar possessed learning worth teaching, a depth of craft that could shape a whole generation of young witches and wizards, and the others knew it and valued him for it. Among all his gifts, one in particular set him apart and followed his memory down through the ages, and that was his rare command of the tongue of serpents, the strange hissing speech known as fortulon. To speak with snakes is a gift given to very few, passed down through certain old bloodlines and appearing only rarely across the long centuries, and Salazar carried it as naturally as another might carry a talent for music or numbers. He could speak to the serpents of field and forest and understand their soft replies, and this gift, more than any other single thing, became bound up with his name, so that the emblem of his house became a silver snake, and the memory of him became forever entwined with the quiet and secret language of serpents. In his own time, the gift was simply another mark of his unusual power, a rare and interesting thing, neither good nor ill in itself, for a language is only a language, and the serpent, in the older wisdom of the world, was a creature of healing and renewal long before it was ever a creature of fear. Salazar valued cleverness above force, and foresight above impulse, and this above all is the key to understanding the man behind the legend. He was not a wizard who trusted in raw power alone, who reached first for the loudest and most violent solution to every difficulty. Instead, he prized the quick mind, the careful plan, the ability to see 3 steps ahead and to choose the subtle path over the obvious one. Where another might have charged straight forward, Salazar would pause and think and wait, weighing the moment, choosing his time, and this patience, this preference for the considered act over the hasty one, was something he tried to teach to those who studied under him. He believed that a witch or wizard who could think clearly and see far would always, in the end, outlast one who relied on strength and temper alone. And there is a real wisdom in that belief, a wisdom that has nothing to do with cruelty and everything to do with the careful use of a good mind. He believed, too, that magic itself was a treasure, something precious and powerful and worth guarding with great care. To Salazar, the magical arts were not a thing to be scattered carelessly or handed out without thought. They were a kind of inheritance, a deep and ancient craft that had been passed down with difficulty through generations, and he felt a keen sense of responsibility toward that inheritance, a wish to protect it and preserve it and keep it from harm. This protective instinct, This sense that magic was a treasure requiring careful stewardship lay at the root of many of his choices, and though later ages would come to view some of those choices harshly, the impulse beneath them was, in its origin, a caring one. The impulse of a man who loved the craft he had devoted his life to, and who feared to see it damaged or lost. Fear, after all, can grow from love as easily as from hatred, and much of what hardened in Salazar over the years grew from a love of the thing he wished to keep safe. He was, by every honest account, a serious and thoughtful figure, not a laughing or careless man, but a deep one, given to long consideration and quiet study, more comfortable perhaps with a difficult problem than with a crowded room. There is a certain loneliness in that kind of mind, the mind that sees further than those around it and feels always the weight of what it foresees. And one imagines that Salazar carried some of that loneliness, even in the bright first years of the school, even among the fellowship of his fellow founders. He gathered students to himself who shared something of his nature, the watchful ones, the ambitious ones, the ones who felt the pull of some distant greatness, and among them he was perhaps most at ease, teaching them to think as he thought and to see as he saw. In this, he was not so very different from any devoted teacher who finds, among a crowd of children, the few who share his own particular fire and pours himself into their kindling. One imagines him bent over old and difficult books in the long evenings, working patiently at some knotted problem of magic that others had abandoned as too hard, and finding in that slow and solitary labor a deep and private contentment, the contentment of a mind doing the thing it was made to do. Such a life is not the life of a monster. It is the life of a scholar, quiet and industrious and turned inward toward the treasures of his craft, and it is closer to the true Salazar than any of the frightening tales that later ages would tell. History, however, did not remember the scholar. History remembered the quarrel and the legend and the long shadow, and it painted Salazar Slytherin in the harsh colors of villainy, a dark figure lurking at the root of every later evil that would ever wear his colors. This is the way of legends, that they simplify and darken, that they take a complicated living person and flatten him into a symbol. And the symbol of Salazar became a symbol of everything cold and proud and dangerous in the magical world. Yet a symbol is not a man, and the man himself was far more than the shadow that outlived him. Behind the fearsome legend stood a scholar who believed that magic was a treasure worth guarding, a master of many arts, a speaker to serpents, a founder of the great school, a teacher who valued the quick mind and the far sight above the loud and the violent. He was flawed, as all people are flawed, and some of his beliefs would harden into things that caused real harm. But he was not a monster, and the house he founded was not born from monstrousness. It matters, in a telling such as this, to hold both truths gently at once, to see the man and the shadow together, and to let neither one erase the other. Salazar Slytherin made choices that grieved his friends and divided the school, and we will come to those choices in their own time, softly, without haste. But before the quarrel, before the legend, before the long centuries of fear, there was simply a gifted and thoughtful wizard who loved the magical craft and wished to guard it, who spoke to serpents and prized cleverness and foresight, and who gave his name and his colors and his careful patient values to a house that would carry them, for better and for worse, across 1,000 years. Let that gentler picture rest with you now, the scholar at his books, the quiet speaker of the serpent tongue, the man behind the legend, and let the harsh colors of the old story soften and fade into the calm dark, as everything softens and fades in the deep quiet hour before sleep. For a long while, the four founders of the great school worked together in fellowship and shared purpose, and the castle they had built rang with the ordinary sounds of a school at peace, lessons and games, and the slow turning of the seasons. Yet in time a quarrel grew between two of them, between Salazar Slytherin and his old friend Godric Gryffindor. And it was a quarrel not of small things, but of a deep and lasting kind. A difference of belief that ran to the very foundations of what the school was meant to be. The two men had once been close as brothers almost. The bold lion and the watchful serpent standing side by side in the making of something great. And it is one of the quiet sorrows of the whole long story that so deep a friendship should have come, at last, to so painful a parting. But beliefs held with a whole heart can divide even the truest of friends. And so it was with these two. The quarrel centered upon a single question, and it was a question about who should be allowed to come to the school and learn the magical arts. Salazar Slytherin held that the school should teach only those children who came from long lines of wizarding families, those whose parents and grandparents had carried magic before them, those born into the old established houses of the magical world. His friend Godric Gryffindor held the opposite, that the doors of the school should stand open to every child born with the gift, whatever their family, whatever their origin, whether they came from a long line of witches and wizards, or whether they were the first in their family to show the strange and wonderful spark of magic. To Godric, a gift was a gift wherever it appeared, and a child who could work magic belonged in a school of magic, and that was the whole of the matter. To Salazar, the question was more troubled, more shadowed by his fears, and he could not set those fears aside. It is worth pausing here, gently, to understand where Salazar's belief came from, for it did not come from simple cruelty, whatever later ages made of it. Salazar lived in a hard and dangerous time for witches and wizards, an age when the ordinary world often feared and hated magic, when those who carried the gift lived always at some risk of suspicion and persecution from those who did not understand them. He worried that children raised outside the magical world, children whose families had no knowledge of the craft and no reason to keep its secrets, might carry word of the school and its students back into that fearful outer world, might expose the whole hidden community to danger. His wish to limit the school to old wizarding families grew, at least in part, from this protective fear. This desire to keep the magical world safe and secret and shielded from harm. It was a fear rooted in a real danger of his day, and though it hardened over time into something narrower and less generous, it began as the anxious care of a man who felt himself guarding a treasure against a hostile world. One can picture the two of them in those difficult final seasons, the lion and the serpent, who had once dreamed a castle into being together, sitting now on opposite sides of some long and painful conversation that could reach no ending, each unable to move the other, each grieved by the widening distance between them. There is a particular sorrow in a disagreement between people who love and respect one another, a sorrow sharper than any quarrel between strangers, for it is bound up with all the warmth that came before, and something of that warmth is spent and lost in every hard word. So it must have been between Salazar and Godric, two great hearts pulling in two directions, neither wishing the parting, yet neither able to prevent it. Godric, for his part, would not yield, and there was a nobility in his refusal, a warmth and an openness that the school would carry ever afterward as one of its finest qualities. He believed that fear was a poor foundation for anything, that to turn away a gifted child was to do a wrong that no danger could justify, and that the school's true strength lay in welcoming all who belonged to it by the plain fact of their magic. Between these two convictions, the one cautious and guarding, the other open and welcoming, there was in the end no bridge to be built, no compromise that could satisfy both hearts. The disagreement deepened season by season, growing colder and sharper, until at last it could not be contained within the walls of the school any longer, and the fellowship of the 4 founders, which had built so much, cracked and would not be mended. And so Salazar Slytherin left the school. He gathered himself and departed from the great castle he had helped to raise, walking away from the towers and the halls and the students, away from the friends with whom he had dreamed the whole thing into being, and he did not return. The parting was a grief to all 4 of them, one imagines, for such partings always are, and the school went on without him. 3 founders where there had been 4, 1 empty chair at the shared table. His house remained, and his students remained, and his colors and his values remained. But the man himself was gone, departed into legend, and something of the school's early wholeness went with him. The other 3 carried on the work, and the castle endured, and the greenhouse kept its place among the 4, but the shadow of that departure fell across it, and would go on falling across it for a very long time indeed. That shadow is the thing we must understand most gently of all, for it lies at the root of so much later misunderstanding, because Salazar left in a quarrel over blood and belonging, because the parting was bitter and the belief that caused it was narrow. A long shadow settled over his house, and over the centuries the house came to be marked by that quarrel, remembered for it, judged by it, as though every child who ever wore green must somehow carry the founder's old and hardened fear. This was never fair, and it was never true, for the students of a house are not the founder, and 1,000 years of children cannot be held to answer for a single ancient disagreement. Yet the shadow lingered, as shadows do, and the memory of the quarrel became one of the deep old roots of the prejudice that would trouble the house for the whole of its long life. A prejudice we will come to understand more fully as this telling goes softly on. It is a sorrowful chapter, this one, the parting of 2 friends, the cracking of a fellowship, the beginning of a long shadow, and yet even here there is something to hold on to in the quiet. The quarrel was real, and it was painful, and its consequences reached far, but it was, in the end, a disagreement between 2 people who each believed they were protecting something precious, the one protecting the magical world from danger, the other protecting the plain right of every gifted child to learn. Neither of them was wholly a villain, and neither was wholly right, and the truth, as it so often does, lay tangled somewhere between their 2 convictions. Let the sorrow of the parting rest gently now, the 2 old friends turning away from one another. The empty chair, the long shadow beginning its slow fall. It happened 1,000 years ago, and it is quiet now, and all its grief has long since settled into the deep calm of the past, where it can trouble no one anymore, and where we may leave it softly as we drift on toward rest. At the very heart of the house that Salazar Slytherin founded, beneath the colors and the emblem and the long tangle of legend, there lies a single guiding value, and that value is ambition. It is the wish to rise, the wish to achieve, the wish to leave some lasting mark upon the world before one's brief span within it is done. The children the Sorting Hat places in the greenhouse are, above all, children in whom this wish burns brightly, children who look at the world and feel some quiet pull toward a distant greatness, some refusal to remain forever small and unnoticed. Ambition is the first true value of Slytherin, the deepest root of its whole nature, and to understand the house we must first understand this quiet fire, and understand it clearly, without the fear and suspicion that so often cloud it. For ambition, gently considered, is not a dark thing. It is very far from cruelty, though the 2 have sometimes been confused by those who fear both. Ambition is simply the engine of achievement, the force that drives a person to reach beyond what they already are, and to become something more. and without it, very little of value would ever be made in the whole of the world. Every discovery that ever pushed back the edges of the unknown, every work of art that ever lifted the heart, every act of daring that ever carried someone across a difficult threshold, all of these grew from ambition, from the refusal to settle, from the quiet insistence that more was possible. The healer who labors to master her craft is ambitious. The scholar who works late into the night to understand a hard thing is ambitious. The young person who dreams of building a better life is ambitious. Ambition is not the enemy of goodness. It is very often the servant of it, the strong, steady force that carries good intentions all the way into the world of deeds. The children of Slytherin, then, carry within them this refusing fire, this unwillingness to accept less than they might become, and it is a gift, though the world has not always seen it as one. To feel ambition is to feel that the future is not yet fixed, that one's own effort and will might shape it, that greatness is a thing that might be reached if only one reaches far enough and steadily enough. There is hope in that, a great deal of hope, for the ambitious heart is a hopeful heart, a heart that believes in the possibility of change and of rising and of becoming. And there is patience in it too, for true ambition is not the quick grasping of the moment, but the long, slow reaching across years, the willingness to work and wait and work again toward a distant aim. The serpent, after all, is a patient creature, and the ambition of Slytherin at its best is a patient ambition, deep and enduring, the quiet fire that burns low and long rather than flaring up and dying. Think for a moment of all the gentle forms this fire can take. The young witch who wishes to master healing so that she might mend what is broken. The young wizard who longs to understand some deep and difficult magic so that he might teach it kindly to others. The quiet student who dreams simply of making a life larger and warmer than the one they were born into. All of these are ambition, and all of these are good, and all of these might have burned in the heart of a green-clad child walking the halls of the castle beneath the lake. Ambition wears 1,000 faces, and the great majority of them are gentle ones, turned toward building and mending and reaching, rather than toward taking and harming. It is true, and it must be said gently and honestly, that ambition can be turned toward dark ends, as any strong force can be turned. A fire that warms a home can also burn it, and the very strength of ambition, the very intensity of the wish to rise, can. In a heart from which mercy and conscience have been stripped away, becomes something grasping and ruthless and cold. The world has seen this happen, and some of the darkest figures ever to wear the green did indeed let their ambition curdle into a hunger for power that trampled everything in its path. But we must be careful and clear here, for it was never the ambition itself that made them dark. It was the loss of the other things, the loss of love, the loss of mercy, the loss of the conscience that should have guided the fire and given it a worthy aim. Ambition guided by conscience builds and heals and creates. Ambition abandoned by conscience destroys. The fire is the same fire. It is the hand that holds it that makes the difference, and the hand belongs always to the one who carries it, never to the house that first kindled the spark. This is why it is such a deep injustice to look at the ambition of Slytherin and see in it only danger, only the seed of villainy, only the first step on some dark road. For every child in whom that fire burned and turned to cruelty, there were countless others in whom it burned and turned to good, children who grew into healers and scholars and builders and leaders, children who reached for greatness and reached it honorably, children whose ambition made the world a little better rather than a little worse. These children are not remembered in the frightening stories, for the frightening stories keep only the villains, but they were the great quiet majority, the ordinary ambitious souls who wanted to rise and did so without harming anyone, and their number across 1,000 years is beyond any counting. The House of Ambition was, for most of its long life, simply a house of driven and hopeful children reaching toward their futures. And that is the truth that the shadow has too long hidden. The Sorting Hat, wise and ancient, listens for this fire when it sits upon each new child's head, and when it hears the fire burning bright and steady, it knows that here is a child of the greenhouse. The hat does not hear cruelty. It does not hear darkness. It hears only ambition, the raw and neutral drive to become and to achieve, and it recognizes in that drive a kind of greatness sleeping, a power that might grow into almost anything at all. What that power grows into is not the hat's to decide, nor the house's, nor the founders long dead. It belongs entirely to the child, to the countless small choices the child will make across the whole of a life, to the presence or absence of love and mercy and conscience in the growing heart. The hat plants the seed by naming the house. The child alone decides what the seed becomes. And so we come to rest upon this first great value, ambition, and we may hold it now without fear, seeing it plainly at last for what it truly is. It is the quiet fire that refuses to settle for less. It is the engine behind every daring and every discovery. It is the hopeful reaching of the heart toward a greatness it believes it might one day touch. It burns in Slytherin bright and steady, and it has burned there for 1,000 years, in the healers and the builders and the countless quiet good souls, far more than in the few who let it darken. There is nothing to fear in ambition itself, nothing at all. Only a strong and neutral force awaiting the hand that will guide it. Let that understanding settle softly over you now. The gentle fire seen clearly and without alarm, the sleeping greatness in every green-clad child, the long patient reaching of the serpent toward the light, and let it warm you quietly as you drift, at ease, toward the deep calm of sleep. Let us turn now, softly and without hurry, to the second of the great gifts that the Sorting Hat listens for when it settles a child into the house of the serpent, the gift of cunning and of resourcefulness, and let us hold it up to the gentle light and see it for what it truly is. The word cunning has grown heavy over the years, weighed down by suspicion, as though it could only ever mean trickery and deceit, as though a cunning mind must always be a scheming one. Yet if we let that heaviness fall away for a little while, the way you might let a coat slip from your shoulders at the end of a long day, we find something quieter and far more admirable underneath. To be cunning, in the oldest and truest sense, is simply to think ahead, to see the shape of a problem before it arrives, to notice the hidden path when the open road has been closed, and to find a way through when others can see only a wall. It is the mind that plans, the mind that prepares, the mind that keeps a little something in reserve for the moment when it will be needed most. Think of the serpent itself, the creature whose silver form curls across the Slytherin crest, and consider how it moves through the world. It does not charge headlong at every obstacle, and it does not roar its intentions to the wind. It waits, and it watches, and it chooses its moment with a patience that looks almost like stillness, and when it moves at last, it moves with a smoothness that wastes nothing. There is a deep wisdom in that quiet economy of effort, a wisdom that the students of Slytherin have carried through 1,000 years, and it is the very opposite of foolishness. To be resourceful is to make much out of little, to look at the tools one has been given and find in them a use that no one else had imagined, to turn a small advantage into a large one through nothing but care and thought. These are the traits of survivors and of strategists, of those who bend the world gently rather than break it, and they have saved as many lives across the long centuries as any act of open bravery ever did. Consider how often, in the great story of the wizarding world, it was not raw power that carried the day, but a clever plan quietly made and quietly kept. A hidden potion brewed in secret, a message passed along a path no one thought to watch, a truth held close until precisely the right hour, a distraction arranged so smoothly that no one ever saw the hand behind it. All of these are the work of the cunning mind, and none of them is cruel. They are the small, careful acts of intelligence that turn the tide when strength alone would have failed, and they belong every bit as much to the heroes of the tale as to its villains. The difference has never been in the cunning itself, which is only a tool, as neutral and as useful as a key or a lantern. The difference has always been in the heart that wields it, and in the ends toward which it is turned. There is a tenderness in resourcefulness that the world too often overlooks, for it is most needed by those who have the least. The child who has been handed few advantages and who must nonetheless find a way to rise learns very quickly to think sideways, to notice the opening that the fortunate never had to see, to make a plan where others could simply make a demand. Salazar Slytherin himself, whatever else the histories say of him, prized this quality above brute force, valuing cleverness over impulse and foresight over the reckless rush. He believed that a sharp and patient mind was among the finest things a witch or wizard could possess. And in this belief he was not wrong, for a well-ordered mind has ended more quarrels than it has ever started, and has healed more wounds than it has caused. We might picture, in the soft green quiet of the common room beneath the lake, a young Slytherin bent over a difficult problem long after the others have drifted away to sleep, turning it this way and that, refusing to accept that there is no answer, trusting that a path exists even when it cannot yet be seen. There is nothing dark in that patient labor. There is only the steady confidence of a mind that has learned it can find its own way through the world, that need not wait to be rescued, that carries within itself the quiet certainty that some door, somewhere, will open if only one keeps searching for the handle. This is resourcefulness at its gentlest and its best, and it is one of the truest treasures of the House of Green and Silver. It is worth remembering, too, that cunning and cruelty have never been the same thing, however often the two have been muddled together in the telling. A person may be endlessly clever and endlessly kind, using every ounce of their wit to protect the ones they love, to smooth a difficult moment, to spare a friend a needless pain. Some of the most quietly loving acts in the whole of the story were also the most cunning, plans laid down years in advance by minds that thought far ahead precisely because they cared so much about what was to come. To dismiss cunning as nothing but a vice is to forget all the good that careful thought has done in the world, all the disasters quietly averted by someone who simply saw further than the rest. And there is a kind of peace to be found in this understanding, a peace that suits the hush of a late hour. For if cunning is only foresight, and resourcefulness only the patient art of making a way, then there is nothing at all to fear in these gifts, and much to admire. They are the qualities of the gardener who plans the seasons, of the healer who anticipates the illness before it takes hold, of the friend who quietly arranges things so that a hard day lands more softly than it might have. They ask us to slow down and to think, to look before we leap, to trust that a little forethought tonight may spare a great deal of trouble tomorrow. That is not the wisdom of a villain. That is the wisdom of anyone who has ever wished to protect something precious. It may help, as well, to remember that resourcefulness is a gift that grows only with practice, and that the House of the Serpent gave its children endless small chances to practice it. In the long green quiet beneath the lake, In the ordinary business of lessons and friendships and the slow work of growing up, these students learned again and again to make the best of what they had, to turn a difficulty into an opportunity, to meet the unexpected with a calm and ready mind rather than with fear. And this is a lesson that belongs to all of us, for we are none of us given everything we might wish for. And the art of living well is in large part the art of making a good and gentle use of what we do have. The serpents understood this sooner than most and honored it as a virtue rather than dismissing it as mere trickery. And in that honoring there is a quiet dignity that the years have never managed to tarnish. So let the old suspicion rest for a while, and let cunning be seen kindly, as the serpent sees the world, without haste and without fear. The students who wore the emerald green were not, in the main, plotters and deceivers. They were thinkers and planners and finders of hidden paths. Children who learned early to trust their own minds and to meet the world with patience rather than with panic. Some of them, of course, turned these gifts towards selfishness, as people of every house sometimes do. But far more of them lived quiet and honorable lives in which their cleverness was simply a comfort and a strength, a lantern carried gently through the dark. The House of Slytherin has always seen the value in a mind that thinks ahead, and there is a great and settling calm in learning to see that value too, in laying down the day's worries with the quiet knowledge that a patient mind will find its way through whatever tomorrow may bring. Let that thought rest lightly upon you now, soft as the greenish light that filters down through the deep water, and let it carry you a little further toward sleep. Beneath the cold reputation that the world has draped so heavily over the House of the Serpent, there runs a current that few outsiders ever pause to notice, a deep and quiet loyalty that binds the green and silver together in ways the loud and boastful houses rarely understand. It is easy to speak of loyalty when it is worn openly, sung about in great halls, waved like a bright banner in the wind. But there is another kind of loyalty, older and stiller and in some ways stronger, the loyalty that does not announce itself, that keeps its promises in the dark, that stands beside a friend through long years and hard seasons without ever asking to be thanked or seen. This is the loyalty of the serpents, and it is one of the noblest things their house has ever produced, though the world has been slow, so very slow, to give it its due. To understand this quiet devotion, we must first set aside the picture of Slytherin as a cold place full of cold hearts, for it is not the truth, and it never really was. Deep beneath the castle, in the still green room that lies under the waters of the Great Lake, generations of students learned that the world beyond might misjudge them, might expect the worst of them simply for the color of their ties, and in that shared knowledge they drew closer together. When a whole house feels itself watched and doubted, its members learn to protect one another with a fierceness that outsiders seldom witness, to close ranks gently around the ones who belong to them, to keep each other's confidences and to guard each other's names. There is nothing sinister in this. It is the natural warmth of those who have learned that they must be a shelter for one another, since the wider world will not always be a shelter for them. Serpents protect their own, and they do so with a devotion that runs quietly and does not tire. Think of the way loyalty can endure across whole lifetimes, unspoken and unbroken, a steady presence that asks for nothing and gives without keeping count. Think of the friend who remains a friend long after it has stopped being easy, who stays when others have drifted away, who remembers a kindness done in childhood and repays it faithfully in the gray years that come after. This kind of loyalty is not loud and it is not simple, for it can bind a person to another through darkness as well as light. and it takes real wisdom to know where such devotion should be given. Yet when it is given to a worthy cause, or to a person truly deserving of it, it becomes one of the finest and most steadfast forces in the whole of the human heart, and the House of Slytherin has produced it again and again. We need look no further than the story of Severus Snape to see how far a serpent's loyalty can reach, though we will speak of him more fully in the chapters still to come. Here it is enough to say that his devotion to a single love, held faithfully across all the long and bitter years of his life, guided every hidden choice he made, and that this devotion was a Slytherin devotion through and through, quiet and secret and fierce beneath a surface of cold. And there was Regulus Black, a boy who kept faith at the last, not with his cruel master, but with a house elf he had come to care for, and with a wider world he had finally chosen to protect, giving everything he had in silence and asking no one to remember him for it. These were serpents, and their loyalty ran deep as the lake itself, and it shaped the whole ending of the story, though almost no one saw it happening. There is a particular tenderness in loyalty that is never rewarded, and the serpents have known a great deal of it. To stand beside someone faithfully while the world assumes the worst of you, to keep a promise that will win you no praise, to hold to a person or a purpose long after the fashion has turned against them. This is a devotion that asks for strength and offers little comfort in return. And yet, the students of the greenhouse have shown it over and over across the centuries. Their loyalty has often been to family, to the old names and the long lines they were born into, and this too has a gentleness to it. For what is more human than to love the ones who raised you? To feel the pull of the blood that runs in your veins, to wish to make proud the people whose faces you have known since before you could speak. Even when that love was tangled with pride, even when it led some of them astray, the loyalty itself was real, and it came from a warm place, and it deserves to be understood with kindness. It is worth lingering in the soft quiet of this hour on how gently such loyalty can express itself in the small and ordinary moments that never make their way into any history. A word kept when it would have been easier to break it. A friend defended quietly when others had turned away. A secret held safe for years, guarded not out of cunning, but out of pure faithfulness to the one who shared it. The keeping of a place at a table for someone who might one day return. The patient waiting through a long silence. The refusal to believe the worst of a person one has chosen to love. These are the daily gestures of loyalty, unremarkable and unrecorded, and the serpents have made them again and again across the centuries, in the common room beneath the lake and in the wide world beyond the castle walls. There is a great tenderness in this steadiness, in the willingness to remain when remaining is hard, and it stands in gentle contradiction to every cold thing that has ever been said about the House of Green and Silver. For a heart that can be so faithful is not a cold heart at all, whatever surface it may wear against the watching world. Loyalty, of course, is like every other gift the house holds dear, in that its worth depends entirely upon where it is placed. A devotion given to a cruel cause becomes fanaticism. A faithful heart turned toward a wicked master becomes a tragedy. And the house has seen this happen too, in the terrible steadfastness of those who followed darkness to the very end. But the failing there was never in the loyalty. It was in the choice of what to be loyal to, in the wisdom that was lacking rather than the devotion that was present. Loyalty itself is only the strength of the bond, only the refusal to let go, and that same strength, turned toward what is good, becomes the very thing that holds families and friendships and whole communities together through their darkest nights. The serpents have always had this strength in abundance. The great and gentle task has only ever been to aim it well. And so, as the hour grows late and the green light settles soft across the still water, let us think kindly of the quiet loyalty of the serpents, the devotion that does not boast, the faithfulness that keeps its watch in the dark. There is something deeply restful in the thought of it, in knowing that beneath even the coolest surface, a warm and steady heart may be beating, that even those the world has misjudged have loved fiercely and stood by their own without fail. It reminds us that loyalty need not be loud to be true, that the deepest bonds are often the quietest ones, that to stay is sometimes the bravest and most loving thing a person can do. Let that gentle truth wrap around you now like a soft blanket in the cool green dim, and let it soothe you, and let it carry you down toward the quiet place where sleep is waiting patiently, faithful as any serpent, to keep its own long watch over you until the morning comes. There is a quality that the world has long counted against the house of the serpent, naming it a flaw and even a kind of cowardice. And that quality is self-preservation, the simple instinct to protect oneself, to survive, to endure. Yet tonight, in the gentle hush of this late hour, let us look at it again more kindly, and see whether it might be not a flaw at all, but a form of quiet wisdom, one that the serpents have understood better than most, and that the rest of the world might do well to learn. For to know when to wait, when to yield, and when to protect oneself is the mark of a mind that intends to endure. And there is nothing shameful in the wish to go on living, to keep breathing through the hard nights, to survive so that one may do good another day. Consider once more the serpent that gives the house its name and its emblem, and the way it meets the world. It does not rush blindly forward into every danger, and it does not throw itself against every threat with reckless abandon. It withdraws when withdrawal is wise. It waits when waiting is the better path. It keeps itself whole and unharmed so that it may live to see another season. There is a deep and ancient sense in this, a patience that the loud and headstrong rarely possess, for the creature that survives is the creature that endures long enough to matter, that keeps its place in the great turning of the world rather than spending itself in a single reckless moment. To call this cowardice is to misunderstand it entirely, for real cowardice abandons others to save itself, while true self-preservation simply keeps the flame alight, guarding the small and precious fire of one's own life so that it may go on giving warmth to those who need it. The wizarding world has too often confused bravery with a willingness to rush headlong into ruin, as though the only worthy course were always the boldest and the most dangerous one. But there is another kind of courage, quieter and harder to see, the courage to survive when survival is itself a struggle, the courage to bend rather than break, to live through a bad season and wait for a better one, to keep going when giving up would be so much easier. The serpents have understood this. They have known that the one who endures may accomplish far more in the long run than the one who burns brightly and is gone. That a life preserved is a life that can still be turned toward good, that to protect oneself is often the first step toward being able to protect anyone else at all. There is a reason we are told to see to our own safety before we reach out to help another, for a hand that has not first steadied itself cannot steady anyone else. Think of how much good in the long story of the world was done not by those who charged forward, but by those who quietly survived, who kept their heads down through the worst of times and waited for the moment when they could act to some real purpose. Think of the ones who chose to live rather than to make a grand and useless gesture, who understood that there was more to be gained by enduring than by perishing, who guarded their own lives not out of selfishness but out of a deep sense that they still had work to do, people to protect, a part yet to play. This is the wisdom of survival, and it has kept alive countless witches and wizards through dark ages that would otherwise have swallowed them, and through them it has kept alive whole families, whole friendships, whole quiet lines of goodness that would have ended had they not chosen to endure. There is, too, a gentleness in self-preservation that we would do well to remember, for it is close kin to the simple act of self-care, of tending to oneself with the same patience one would offer a friend, to rest when one is weary, to withdraw from what would only harm, to refuse a battle that need not be fought, to protect one's own peace and one's own strength. These are not failings but forms of wisdom, and they are deeply suited to the quiet of a night like this one. The serpents knew that a person cannot pour endlessly from an empty vessel, that there is no virtue in running oneself to ruin, that sometimes the wisest and most loving thing one can do is simply to stop, to breathe, to keep oneself whole. There is permission in that thought, a soft and welcome permission to lay down one's burdens for a while and simply be, and to trust that the world will still be there in the morning. There is a quiet lesson in this for all of us, and it is a lesson especially suited to the slow and gentle hours of the night. So much of the world urges us always onward, always forward, always toward the next struggle and the next demand, as though to pause were a kind of failure and to rest were a kind of surrender. But the serpents knew otherwise, and their wisdom is a soothing one, for it tells us that there is honor in endurance, that there is strength in the willingness to wait, that the one who protects the small, quiet flame of their own life and their own peace is doing something wise and good and not something shameful. To lie down at the end of a long day, to set aside the cares that cannot be answered tonight, to give oneself over to rest so that one may rise renewed. These are acts of self-preservation in the truest and most tender sense, and there is no cowardice in them whatsoever. There is only the deep and patient wisdom of a creature that knows how to endure, that keeps itself whole through the dark seasons, that trusts the coming of a better morning and quietly saves its strength to meet it. Of course, like every gift the house holds dear, self-preservation can be carried too far, curdling into cowardice when it abandons others to save the self, hardening into selfishness when it thinks of nothing but its own comfort. The house has seen this failing too, in those who saved their own skins at the cost of their souls, who chose survival at any price and let go of everything worth surviving for. But the failing there was never in the instinct itself, which is only the natural love of life. The failing was in letting that instinct grow monstrous, in forgetting that a life preserved is meant to be a life well used. Balanced by conscience and by care for others, the wish to endure becomes a quiet strength, the steady foundation on which all lasting good is built. For only those who survive can go on doing good, and only those who protect themselves can be there again and again for the ones who need them. So let us make our peace in this soft and darkening hour with the serpent's wish to endure, and let us see it plainly as the wisdom it truly is. There is nothing shameful in wanting to live, nothing weak in wishing to be safe, nothing cowardly in the instinct that keeps us whole through the hard nights. The House of Green and Silver understood this long before the rest of the world was ready to hear it. And there is a great and settling comfort in learning to understand it too. For tonight, at least, there is no battle to be fought and no danger to be met. There is only the simple, gentle work of resting, of protecting your own peace, of letting yourself be safe and warm and whole beneath the quiet green light. Survive this night gently, the serpents would say. Endure into the morning softly, and trust that to rest is itself a kind of wisdom, and let that trust carry you down, slow and easy, into the deep still waters of sleep. Let us rest our thoughts now upon the emblem of the house itself, the silver serpent coiled upon a field of deep emerald green, and let us consider how much gentle meaning is folded into that quiet image, meaning that the world has too often overlooked in its haste to see only menace. The crest of Slytherin is not a thing of teeth and terror, whatever the frightened imagination may make of it. It is a serpent of silver, cool and pale as moonlight, resting upon a green as deep and soft as leaves lying in shadow, and its colors are green and silver, the colors of the forest at dusk and of the moon upon still water. There is a beauty in that pairing that has nothing to do with fear, a beauty of shadow and of quiet light, of the deep places where the world grows calm and cool, and it is worth pausing over as the hour grows late. Green has always been the color of growing things, of the leaf and the fern and the moss upon the old stone, of springtime and of renewal, and of the patient life that returns each year without fail. It is a restful color, the color the eye seeks out when it is weary, the color of gardens and of forests and of the quiet green heart of the world. And silver is the color of the moon, of still water under starlight, of frost upon the morning grass, and of the cool, clear light that soothes rather than dazzles. Together, they make a palette not of alarm, but of calm, the deep green of the sheltering wood and the soft silver of the gentle moon. And it is fitting that the students of Slytherin should have carried these colors for 1,000 years. For they are the colors of the still places, of shadow and of moonlight, of the quiet hours when the world lies down to rest. But it is the serpent itself, the ancient creature at the heart of the crest, that holds the deepest meaning of all, and here the world has strayed furthest from the truth. For long before the serpent was ever cast as a thing to be feared, it was honored across countless old traditions as a symbol of healing, of renewal, and of hidden wisdom, and these are the meanings that have always belonged, by right, to the house of Slytherin. The serpent was a creature of medicine and of restoration, whose image was twined around the staffs of the great healers of legend, whose presence spoke not of harm, but of the mending of harm, of the quiet art of making the sick whole again. To wear the serpent, in the oldest sense, was to align oneself with the healers and the wise, with those who understood the deep and hidden workings of the world, and turned that understanding toward the good. And there is one gesture of the serpent above all others that speaks most gently to a mind drifting towards sleep, and that is the shedding of its skin. For the serpent sheds its old skin and emerges renewed, leaving behind what it has outgrown and stepping forward fresh and whole. And in this simple act, the ancient world saw one of the greatest of all symbols, the symbol of transformation, of rebirth, of the endless capacity to begin again. The serpent does not cling to what is worn and finished. It lets the old fall away, quietly and without grief, and it goes on renewed, and there is a deep and soothing wisdom in that, a wisdom that speaks to every one of us who has ever needed to let go of an old day, an old worry, an old self, and begin once more. The emblem of Slytherin, rightly understood, is not a warning, but a promise. The promise that we may always be renewed, that nothing is ever truly final, that the skin of one day may be shed to make room for the next. It is worth remembering, too, that the serpent has long been a keeper of hidden knowledge, a guardian of the deep and secret wisdom that lies beneath the surface of things. In many an old tale, the serpent dwelt in the quiet places, in the roots of the great tree or the depths of the still pool, watching over truths too precious to be left in the open, offering them only to those patient and worthy enough to seek them out. And there is something fitting in this, for the house of Slytherin has always valued the wisdom that runs deep rather than the noise that stays upon the surface, the knowledge earned through patience and care, rather than seized in a careless rush. To wear the serpent, then, was to be marked as a keeper of depths, a seeker after the hidden and the true. And there is a quiet nobility in that image that the frightened world has been far too quick to forget. The serpent guards its treasure, not out of greed, but out of reverence, understanding that some things are worth the keeping. And this, too, is one of the softer meanings folded into the silver coil upon the emerald field. How strange and how sad, then, that an emblem so full of healing and renewal should have come to be seen as a mark of darkness. And yet, how easily we can set that sadness aside once we understand where the true meaning lies. The serpent upon the green field speaks of transformation far more than it ever spoke of menace, of the hidden knowledge that heals rather than harms, of the quiet strength that grows in the shadow and the cool. When the students of the greenhouse looked upon their crest, whatever the rest of the castle might have imagined, they might have seen in it a reflection of the best that was in them, the capacity to grow, to renew themselves, to shed the old skin of expectation and become something finer than the world assumed they could be. There is a whole hidden garden of meaning in that silver coil, and it has waited patiently all these long centuries for anyone willing to look with kinder eyes. Picture the crest now, as it might hang in the still green quiet of the common room beneath the lake, the silver serpent gleaming softly in the greenish light that filters down through the deep water, the emerald field as calm and cool as the lake itself. There is nothing frightening in that image when it is seen rightly. There is only a quiet beauty, a stillness, a sense of shelter and of depth, of a place set apart from the noise of the world where a weary mind might come to rest. The colors soothe. The serpent speaks of healing and of renewal, and the whole emblem, taken together, becomes a kind of lullaby in silver and green, a picture of calm to hold in the mind as the eyes grow heavy and the breath grows slow. So let us keep this gentler image with us as we drift onward through the night, the silver serpent upon the deep green field, the ancient sign of healing and hidden wisdom, the creature that sheds its old skin and rises, renewed beneath the quiet moon. Let it stand for everything soft and restful that the house of Slytherin has always secretly held, the beauty of shadow and moonlight, the promise of transformation, the patient wisdom of the still places. There is no menace here, only calm, only the cool green glow of the deep water and the soft silver gleam of the serpent at rest. Let that image settle over you now like a gentle tide. Let the green grow deep and the silver grow soft, and let the old emblem watch over you kindly, a quiet promise of renewal, as you shed the long day like a worn skin and drift, slow and untroubled, toward the deep and healing waters of sleep, far below the towers and the staircases, far beneath the warm firelit rooms where most of the castle spent its evenings. There lay a chamber that few outsiders ever saw, and it was there that the students of the serpent came home each night to rest. To reach it, one had to descend through the lower passages of the school, down past the cool stone of the dungeons, into a part of the castle where the air grew still and quiet, and the noise of the upper floors faded away into nothing, until at last the walls themselves seemed to breathe with a slow and patient calm. The entrance was hidden, as so many things in Slytherin were hidden, marked only by a stretch of bare, damp wall that gave no sign of what lay behind it, and only those who knew the way could pass, speaking the season's word to the stones and watching them slide silently apart to reveal the long green room beyond. The word itself was changed from time to time, kept close and passed quietly among the members of the house, so that the entrance remained a secret shared only by those who belonged, and this small ritual of speaking to the wall and waiting for it to open became For generations of students, one of the gentle habits of coming home, a thing done half in sleep at the end of a long day, familiar and reassuring as the turning of a key in one's own door. The common room of Slytherin reached out under the waters of the Great Lake, and this was the wonder of it, the thing that set it apart from every other refuge in the school. Its windows did not look out upon lawns or mountains or the ordinary sky, but into the deep green water itself, so that the light which filled the room was not the light of the sun at all, but a soft filtered glow that had traveled down through many fathoms before it reached the glass. That light moved. It shifted and rippled and wavered across the ceiling and the walls in slow patterns, as the water above stirred and settled, and it painted everything in shades of green and shadow, so that a student sitting quietly by the window might watch the play of it for a long while and feel the whole of the day loosen and drift away from them like silt sinking to the lakebed. Sometimes the shapes of the lake's own creatures passed by beyond the glass, unhurried and enormous and strange, the pale drifting forms of things that lived in the deep water, and they moved without sound and without hurry, gliding across the windows and then away again into the greenish dark. There was nothing to fear in them. They belonged to the lake, as the students belonged to the room, and their slow passage only deepened the sense of shelter, the sense that here, beneath so much cool and silent water, one was held apart from the ordinary busy world and given leave to be still. On the coldest winter nights, when the grounds above lay under snow and the wind bit at the high windows of the towers, the lake room stayed even and mild, wrapped in the steady quiet of the water, untouched by the weather of the surface. The room itself was long and low, built of rough stone that had been worn smooth by 1,000 years of quiet living, and it was furnished not with brightness, but with a deep and comfortable dimness. Lanterns hung here and there, throwing small pools of greenish light, and they did not blaze or glare, but glowed gently, the way embers glow when a fire has burned down to its last soft warmth. There were chairs of dark carved wood, high-backed and worn. And there were long, low couches where a student could stretch out and let their eyes half close. And there were tables where books lay open and quills rested, and the small business of learning went slowly on. A great fireplace stood along one wall, carved about with the shapes of serpents, and when it was lit the flames sent a warmer light out across the green, so that the room held two lights at once, the cool light of the water and the warm light of the fire, and the two of them met and mingled in the middle of the room and made a peace between them. To sit in that room in the late hours, when the lessons were long finished and the corridors above had emptied and quieted, was to feel oneself held in a place set gently apart from time. The water pressed close beyond the windows, and yet it did not press in, and the sound of it was not truly a sound at all, but a kind of deep and settled hush, a silence with weight to it, the silence of a world sunk far below the reach of noise. Students who had grown up in the house often said, later in their lives, that they had never again slept so deeply as they had slept beneath the lake, cradled in that cool green quiet, rocked by the slow motion of the water overhead. And there was a truth in this that had nothing to do with magic and everything to do with the simple mercy of a place made for rest. The serpent, after all, is a creature that loves the cool and the dim and the low places of the world, and the room had been built as a serpent might build, close to the earth and close to the water, sheltered and secret and still. It was not a room made to impress the passing visitor, for almost no visitor ever came, and it was not a room made for display. It was made for those who lived in it, made for long evenings and quiet study and the deep, unhurried talk of friends, made for the kind of rest that gathers slowly and holds on. And in this, it revealed something true about the house itself, something that the old rumors and the old fears had never understood, which was that beneath the cold reputation there lay a place of genuine shelter, a hearth as real as any other in the castle, warm in its own quiet way. Green was everywhere in that room, the deep and restful green of leaves in shadow, of moss on old stone, of still water in the evening, and silver caught here and there in the lantern light, in the threads of the hangings and the fittings of the furniture, like moonlight upon the surface of a pond. These were not harsh colors. They were the colors of the natural world at its most peaceful, the colors of a forest at dusk and a lake at nightfall, and to live among them was to be steeped, night after night, in a quietness that seeped slowly into the bones. The mind that had raced all day through lessons and worries and small ambitions found, in that green dimness, a place at last to let go, to slow, to sink towards sleep as gently as the light itself sank down through the water above. And so, when the last lantern had been turned low, and the fire had settled into its soft red coals, and the shapes beyond the windows had drifted away into the dark, the students of the Serpent would drift too, down into their dormitories and down into sleep, wrapped in the cool green hush of the lake room, held safe beneath so many quiet fathoms of water. There was nothing menacing in it, nothing cold in the true sense of the word, only a deep and ancient calm, the calm of a place that had sheltered 1,000 years of children and would shelter 1,000 more, asking nothing of them but that they rest. To picture it now, in the last waking moments before one's own sleep, is a soothing thing. To imagine that low green room far beneath the water, dim and warm and still, the lanterns glowing, the fire settling, the great lake breathing slowly overhead, and the whole of it wrapped in a silence so deep and so kind that it seems to reach out across all the long years and gather the listener into its rest as well, down and down, gently, into the soft green quiet of the deep. There is a question that hangs quietly over the whole of this house, and it is worth turning over slowly and gently in the mind, the way one turns a smooth stone over in the hand. And the question is simply this: where did the prejudice against Slytherin truly come from? And why did it grow so large and last so long? For prejudice does not spring up out of nothing. It is not the natural state of things, but something that gathers over time, fed drop by drop, layered year upon year, until at last it stands so tall and so old that people forget it was ever built at all and begin to mistake it for a simple truth. And the prejudice against the serpents was very much a thing that had been built, slowly, over centuries, out of a few dark deeds and a great deal of long memory, and it is worth taking the time to see how the building was done. It began, as so much of this story begins, with the old quarrel between the founders, with the parting of Salazar Slytherin from the school he had helped to raise. That parting left a wound, and wounds of that kind do not close cleanly. Long after Salazar himself had gone, long after the true details of the disagreement had faded into rumor and half-memory, the shape of it remained, the sense that this one house had been founded by the one founder who left, the one who quarreled, the one who walked away. And so from the very earliest days there clung to Slytherin a faint air of separateness, a whisper of the outsider, and that whisper never entirely died. It became the first stone in the wall, and once that first stone had been set, all the others found a place to rest upon it. For a wall of prejudice, like any wall, needs only a foundation to begin, and after that it rises almost of its own accord, each generation adding a course of stone, without quite noticing that it does so, until the thing stands complete, and no one alive remembers a time before it. Upon that first stone, others were laid, and they were laid by the deeds of a small number of people across the long centuries. For it is true, and there is no use pretending otherwise, that some of the wizarding world's darkest figures came out of the greenhouse. When such a person rose and did terrible things and left a terrible name behind them, that name was remembered. And it was remembered together with the house they had come from, and so the two became bound in the common mind. People saw the darkness, and they saw the green, and slowly, without ever quite deciding to, they began to believe that the one had produced the other, that the house itself was the root and the source of the harm. This is the way that prejudice always works. It takes the worst example it can find and holds it up as though it were the whole. But here is the quiet thing that such reasoning always forgets, and it is a thing worth resting upon. A handful of villains cannot define 1,000 years of students. For every dark name that history remembered, there were countless other names it did not trouble to record. The names of ordinary witches and wizards who wore green and silver and then went out into the world and lived good and honest and unremarkable lives. They became healers and shopkeepers and teachers and parents. They kept their promises and raised their children and helped their neighbors and harmed no one. And because they did no great evil, history did not write them down. And so they vanished from the story, leaving only the loud and the terrible behind to speak for the whole house. This is the great unfairness at the heart of the matter, that the quiet good is forgotten while the loud harm is remembered, and the memory that remains is therefore a false one, weighted entirely toward the shadow. Think of it in the way one might think of any large group of people gathered under a single name. Within any 1,000 souls, there will be a few who do great harm, and a few who do great good, and a vast and gentle multitude in the middle who do neither, who simply live. To judge the whole 1,000 by the few who did harm is to commit an error so plain that we would never accept it in our own lives, and yet it was accepted year after year when it came to the serpents, because the error had been repeated so many times and for so long that it had hardened into custom. Children arrived at the school already half believing it, having heard it from older students who had heard it from older students still, and so the belief passed down the years like a story told and retold until no one could remember who had first begun it. And there was another thing that fed the prejudice, subtler than the rest, which was the very nature of the house's own values. For the serpents prized cunning and ambition and self-preservation and a certain guarded quiet, and these are traits that are easy to misread from the outside. A person who thinks before speaking can be mistaken for a person with something to hide. A person who guards their own can be mistaken for a person who cares for no one else. A person who is patient and watchful and slow to act can be mistaken for a person who is cold. And so the house's virtues, seen from without and without goodwill, could be twisted into the very things that people feared, and the twisting happened all the more easily because people had already decided, long before, what it was they expected to find. Prejudice of this kind has a way of feeding itself too, which is one of the saddest parts of the whole matter. When a young serpent found themselves distrusted and held at arm's length simply for the color they wore, some of them, wounded by it, drew closer together and further apart from the rest. And this drawing apart was then taken as proof of the very coldness they had been accused of, when in truth it was only the natural huddling of those who have been left out in the cold. The suspicion created the distance, and the distance was then blamed on the suspected, and around it went, each turn making the wall a little higher, and none of it touching the simple truth of who those children actually were. To see all of this clearly is not to excuse the real darkness that did come from the house, for that darkness was real, and later in this telling we will look at it honestly. and without flinching. It is only to place that darkness where it belongs, as the deeds of particular people who made particular choices, rather than as the natural fruit of a whole house of children. The house did not reach into those few and make them cruel. Their own choices did that, and their choices were their own, and they cannot be spread out and smeared across 1,000 years of ordinary lives that had nothing to do with them. And so, resting in this thought as the night deepens, we might let a small and quiet fairness settle over the whole matter. The fairness of seeing a thing as it truly is, rather than as it has long been said to be. The prejudice against the greenhouse was built slowly, out of an old quarrel and a few dark names, and a great deal of misreading, and like all such walls it can be unbuilt slowly too, stone by stone, simply by remembering the forgotten multitude, the quiet good souls who lived and loved and harmed no one and were never written down. There is a gentleness in that remembering, a kind of quiet setting right, and it is a peaceful thing to hold in the mind as the lantern light dims and the long night settles softly toward its rest. Of all the shadows that have gathered over the house of the serpent across the long centuries, none has been darker or more famous than the story of the Chamber of Secrets, and yet when it is looked at slowly and steadily in the calm of a quiet night, it turns out to be a smaller and stranger thing than the legend would have us believe, and a thing that ought never to have been laid at the feet of a whole house of children. So let us take it gently apart, this old story, and see it for what it truly was, so that it may frighten no one anymore, and may instead become simply one more chapter of history, understood and set at peace. The tale went that Salazar Slytherin, in the days when the four founders still worked together to raise the great castle, had hidden a secret room somewhere deep within its walls before he departed. This room, it was said, he had sealed, and sealed it in such a way that only his own true heir, someone descended from his line and sharing his rare gifts, could ever open it. And within the room, so the whisper went, there slept a guardian, a creature that Salazar had placed there, waiting through the long ages for the day the heir would come and wake it. For a very long time, this was nothing more than a story, a thing murmured among frightened students in the dark, passed from one to another across the generations, never proven, never found, dismissed by many of the learned as no more than an old and gloomy legend clinging to the castle stones. And for most of the castle's history, that is exactly what it was, a story and nothing more. Countless students of the Green House came and went across the centuries, arriving as children and leaving as grown witches and wizards, and not one of them opened any hidden chamber, for the simple reason that not one of them was the particular heir the legend spoke of, and most of them, indeed, gave the old tale no more than a passing shiver before returning to their lessons and their friendships and their ordinary lives. The chamber, if it existed at all, stayed sealed and silent and forgotten beneath the school, harming no one, touching no one. A rumor and a chill and nothing else. For age upon age upon age, teachers came and went, and headmasters came and went, and the tale was searched for now and then by the curious and the learned, and nothing was ever found. And gradually most of the school came to treat the chamber as one treats any old ghost story, with a shiver on a dark night and a shrug in the morning light, a thing half believed and half laughed at, kept alive only because such stories are pleasant to be frightened by when one is safe and warm among friends. When at last the chamber was truly opened, and this is the heart of the whole matter and the thing that must be understood clearly, it was opened not by the house, but by a single person. It was the work of one dark heir alone, one descendant of Salazar's ancient line who had learned the old serpent tongue and used it to find and unseal the hidden room and to wake the thing that waited within. This was the choice of one individual, made for that individual's own dark purposes, and it had nothing whatever to do with the thousands of other children who wore the same colors and slept in the same green room beneath the lake. They did not know of it. They did not wish for it. They had no part in it. And to spread the guilt of that one heir across all of them, across all the centuries of ordinary serpents before and after, is precisely the kind of unfairness we have already spoken of, the taking of the worst single example and holding it up as though it were the whole. And it is worth pausing here, in the quiet, to feel the true shape of that unfairness. A single person, working alone and in secret, did a dark thing, using an inheritance that happened to be tied to this one house, and from that single act an entire house of children was made to carry suspicion for generations. Yet the same castle held countless brave and gentle serpents who would have been horrified by the deed, who loved their school and their friends and wished harm on no one, and their innocence was quietly overlooked because it was easier to fear the green than to think carefully about who had actually done what. The chamber was the crime of an heir, not the intention of every child who ever wore green, and the difference between those two things is the difference between justice and prejudice. There is something almost sorrowful, too, in the figure of Salazar himself when one considers this legend without malice. Whatever bitterness led him to hide such a room, if indeed he hid it at all, it was the act of one man near the end of his time at the school, a man wounded by a quarrel and grown hard in his convictions. And it was not a curse he laid upon his own students, but a private thing left buried in the dark. The students who came after him inherited his colors and his values, the ambition and the cunning and the deep quiet loyalty. But they did not inherit his quarrel, and they most certainly did not inherit any wish to see the school harmed. They were children, arriving each year full of hope and nervousness like children everywhere, and the old buried thing beneath the castle was no more their doing than the weather. And here is the gentlest truth of the whole story, the one that ought to soothe away the last of the old fear, which is that when the chamber was opened, terrible as that hour was, the castle survived. It endured. The school did not fall, and the story did not end in ruin, for there was courage enough within those walls to meet the darkness and turn it back. And much of that courage, as this telling will show in the chapters still to come, was itself the courage of serpents, of green hearts that chose the light. The legend that had frightened so many for so long was, in the end, met and answered. And the school went on, and the children returned, and the great calm of the castle closed over the wound and healed it as still water closes over a fallen stone. And the very fact of that survival tells us something worth holding on to, for it means that whatever darkness the old legend held, it was not the last word, and it was not stronger than the goodness that stood against it. And the school that Salazar had helped to build proved able, in the end, to outlast even the shadow he had left behind. So, we may set the old story down now, gently, and let it lose its power to frighten. The Chamber of Secrets was real, or real enough, and its opening was a dark hour, and there is no need to pretend otherwise. But it was the deed of one heir alone, a single dark choice in a long chain of years, and it does not stain the house that surrounded it any more than a single storm stains the whole of a long and peaceful summer. The thousands of quiet serpents who never opened any chamber, who lived and studied and slept beneath the green light of the lake and harmed no one, are the true measure of the house. And they always were, and the frightening legend, understood at last for the small and particular thing it truly was, can trouble the mind no longer. And so, as the night grows deep and the last unease loosens and drifts away, we can let the old chamber sink back into the quiet stone where it belongs, sealed and silent and answered, a story understood and therefore stripped of its fear. There is nothing left in it now to keep anyone awake, only history, gentled and set right, and the calm knowledge that the castle stood, and the children slept safe, and the green light still moved softly across the water as it always had, patient and peaceful and kind, drifting the mind onward toward its own untroubled rest. If the House of the Serpent has ever produced a heart that was misjudged for longer and more deeply than any other, it belonged to a man named Severus Snape, who for many years served as the head of Slytherin House, and who was, for almost the whole of his story, the most misunderstood person in it. To look at him from the outside, as nearly everyone did, was to see a cold and bitter man. Sharp of tongue and forbidding of manner, wrapped always in black, and seemingly wrapped as well in a permanent disdain for the world around him. And this is how he was seen, year after year, by students and colleagues alike, so that the true shape of him lay hidden beneath that cold surface, as a warm current lies hidden beneath the frozen crust of a winter river, unseen and unsuspected, running quietly on. People are quick to judge a surface, and slow, so very slow, to imagine what might lie beneath it, and Severus Snape presented a surface so forbidding that almost no one ever thought to look further, which was, in its own way, exactly what he intended. For a man who must keep a great secret learns to make himself unapproachable, and there is no better shield against the questions of others than a manner that discourages any question at all. For beneath that hard and unwelcoming surface there ran a loyalty and a courage so deep and so sustained that it is difficult, once it is finally understood, to think of him without a kind of ache. Severus Snape spent the long and dangerous years of his life as a spy, standing in a place of terrible risk, walking a narrow and unlit path between two great powers, and doing so not for glory, for no one knew of it, and not for reward, for he received none, but for the sake of a promise made in the depths of his own heart. He had loved, in his youth, with a love that never left him, a love that outlasted death itself and reached on across all the long years that followed, and it was that love, quiet and unspoken and utterly unshakable, that set the whole course of his hidden life. The one he loved had a son, a boy who grew up under the shadow of great danger, and Severus Snape gave himself over in secret to the guarding of that boy. This was the strange and difficult heart of his courage, that he protected the child ceaselessly while pretending at every turn to dislike him. He wore coldness toward the boy like a mask, spoke to him sharply, seemed to favor him not at all, and all the while he was watching over him, again and again, turning aside the dangers that gathered around him, standing between the child and harm in ways the child never saw and never suspected. There can be few loyalties harder to bear than a loyalty that must disguise itself as its opposite, that must accept being misunderstood and even hated by the very person it is spending itself to save. And yet, this was the loyalty that Severus Snape carried, year upon year, without complaint and without any hope of thanks. To be a spy is to live entirely without the comfort of being known. Everyone around him misread him, and he could not correct them, for the whole value of his position lay in his being misread. Those who served the darkness believed him to be one of them, and he had to let them believe it, playing his part so well that it never slipped. Those who served the light largely distrusted him, seeing only the cold surface and the old associations, and he had to bear that distrust in silence, for to defend himself would have been to reveal himself, and to reveal himself would have been to fail. He lived, therefore, in a kind of complete solitude, holding the truth of himself locked away where no one could reach it, sustained by nothing but the memory of a love and the strength of a purpose he had chosen and would not abandon. It was a lonely courage, perhaps the loneliest kind there is, and he carried it to the very end. And here is the thing that makes his story so fitting a jewel in the crown of the greenhouse. For everything that Severus Snape was, is in truth a portrait of the serpent's own values turned toward the light. He was cunning, endlessly cunning, for the whole of his long deception required a mind that could think many moves ahead and hide its true intent behind 100 small performances. He was ambitious in the deepest sense, not for wealth or station, but for the achievement of a single overriding purpose that he pursued with unbending will. He was a master of self-preservation, not out of cowardice, but because his survival was the very thing that kept the boy safe, so that every day he stayed alive and undiscovered was another day the protection held. And above all, he was loyal with that fierce and quiet loyalty of serpents that outsiders so rarely notice, loyal to a love and a promise across all the long cold years. And there is no braver form that loyalty can take. His was not the bright and open courage of the lion, the courage that charges forward with banners flying and is cheered for it. His was the hidden courage of the serpent, the courage that works in shadow and silence and asks for no applause, the courage that endures being hated in order to do good, that accepts a lifetime of misunderstanding as the price of a task that matters more than its own good name. And in some ways, that hidden courage is the harder of the two. For the one who charges forward is at least seen and honored, while the one who works in secret must find within themselves alone the strength to go on, unwitnessed, unthanked, sustained by conviction and nothing else. Severus Snape found that strength again and again, across years that would have broken a lesser will, and he found it inside the very house that the world had learned to fear. It may well be, when all is weighed, that his was the bravest heart the house ever knew, and there is a deep and quiet justice in that thought. For the world had spent 1,000 years believing that the greenhouse was the home of cold hearts and dark deeds, and here, at the center of its darkest hour, stood a son of that house, whose cold surface hid a warmth of purpose and a depth of love greater than almost any other in the whole story, whose apparent bitterness was the disguise of a courage that never once faltered. He proved, in the living of his difficult life, that the serpent's gifts of cunning and patience and self-command and fierce hidden loyalty are not dark things at all, but tools, and that in the hands of a heart set upon love, they become the instruments of a heroism so quiet that the world may not even notice it until long after it is done. And so, as the night settles softly around us, it is a gentle and a moving thing to hold the true memory of Severus Snape in the mind, to lay aside the cold surface that everyone once saw, and to see instead the warm and steadfast current that ran hidden beneath it all along, the love that outlasted everything, the loyalty that wore the mask of its opposite, the lonely courage that spent itself in shadow for the sake of a child who never knew. Here was a serpent whose whole life was a quiet act of protection, misjudged to the last and heroic all the way through. And to understand him at last, to see him truly, and to grant him at last the honor he never sought, is a peaceful and a healing thing. A small setting right of an old injustice, carried gently into the deepening quiet of the night. Among all the quiet heroes the greenhouse ever raised, there is one whose name was almost forgotten, one whose bravery was hidden so deeply and for so long that even those who fought beside him for years never guessed what he had done. And his name was Regulus Arcturus Black. He was born into one of the oldest and proudest of the wizarding families, a family that carried the belief in the purity of blood the way other families carry heirlooms, passing it down from parent to child as though it were a treasure rather than a wound. And he grew up in a tall, dark house in London, where the very walls seemed to whisper the old convictions, where a long tapestry traced the family line back through the centuries, and where the names of those who strayed from the family creed were burned away and left as small scorched holes in the cloth. Regulus was the younger of two brothers, and while his elder brother Sirius rebelled against everything the family stood for and eventually left, Regulus stayed, and Regulus believed, and Regulus was. For a time, everything his parents had ever hoped a son might be. He was sorted into Slytherin, as nearly all his family had been for generations. And he was a talented and admired student, quick and clever and eager to prove himself. And when he grew a little older, he did the thing that many young men of his background did in those dark and frightening years, which was to give himself over to the cause of the wizard who called himself Lord Voldemort. He became one of the followers who took the mark upon their arms, one of those who believed the promises and the grand and terrible vision, and he was young enough and proud enough to feel that he had joined something magnificent, something that would remake the world and place people like him at the summit of it. For a while he was dazzled, as the young so often are, by the nearness of power and the flattery of belonging, and he did not yet understand what he had truly bound himself to, nor how far the cruelty at the heart of it would reach. The turning came quietly, the way the most important changes in a life so often do, without trumpets and without warning. The dark wizard Regulus served needed a servant to help him with a certain task, a task that required a house elf, and Regulus offered his own elf, a small and devoted creature named Creature, who had served the Black family faithfully all his long life. Creature was taken to a hidden cave beside the sea, a place of black water and cold enchantments, and there he was, made part of a cruel test, forced to drink a dreadful potion so that his master could be certain the defenses would work. And then he was left behind to die in that terrible, dark place. But the magic of house elves is old and strange, and not fully understood even by the greatest wizards, and Creature was able to do what no human could have done in that spot, and he vanished away and returned home, broken and trembling, and he told Regulus everything that had happened to him in the cave. And it was in listening to that small and faithful creature, in seeing what had been done to a servant who had asked for nothing and given everything, that something in Regulus Black finally woke. He began to understand, slowly, and then, all at once, that the cause he had given himself to did not value loyalty, did not value life, did not value anything at all except the endless hunger of one man for power and for the conquering of death itself. And he understood too that his own family, his own house, his own pride, had helped to build the road that led to such things. He did not announce his change of heart, for he was a Slytherin still. And he understood that the loudest rebellion is not always the wisest one. And so he kept his new resolve secret, folded away where no one could see it. And he began, alone and quietly, to plan the most dangerous act of his short life. For in listening to Creature, Regulus had learned something that almost no one else in the world knew, which was that his master had hidden a piece of his own torn soul inside a small golden locket, and had concealed that locket at the bottom of the enchanted cup of poison in the cave by the sea. Regulus did not fully understand the nature of the object, but he understood enough. He understood that it was a thing that helped to anchor the dark wizard to life, a thing that must be found and destroyed if the world were ever to be free, and he resolved that he would be the one to take it, whatever the cost to himself might be, and that the cost, he already suspected, would be everything. He returned to the cave, and he brought Creature with him, not out of cruelty, but because he needed the elf, and because he trusted him. And this time it was Regulus who drank the dreadful potion. Regulus who suffered the burning thirst and the visions of despair that the poison poured into the mind of anyone who dared to empty that cup. He drank it to the very bottom, and when he had drunk it, he took the true locket and gave Creature a copy to leave in its place. A false locket into which he had slipped a small note, a handful of words meant for the dark wizard to find one day. A message that told him that the secret was known, that the true Horcrux had been stolen, and that the one who took it hoped to be mortal again and to meet death as an equal when at last the great enemy could be defeated. And then, weakened and tormented and consumed by the thirst the potion had given him, Regulus was pulled down into the black water of the cave by the cold and grasping things that lived within it. And there, alone, in the dark, far from anyone who might ever know, he died. He gave one last command to Creature before the end, which was to take the true locket home and to destroy it by any means the elf could find, and to tell no one what had been done, and Creature obeyed, though the destroying of it was beyond his small powers. And so for long years the locket sat hidden in the old dark house while the world above went on, never knowing that a young man of the green house had already struck the first secret blow against the darkness, years before anyone else even understood the shape of the enemy they faced. His only signature was 2 initials and a letter, the mark of Regulus Arcturus Black, left inside a locket that others would one day puzzle over without knowing whose hand had written the words or how much that hand had paid. And this is the quiet marvel of his story, that it was born entirely within Slytherin, entirely within the house so often accused of producing nothing but villains. Here was a boy raised in every prejudice the house was blamed for, a boy who had worn the mark and believed the lie, and yet who found, in the end, a conscience strong enough to turn him around, and a courage deep enough to carry him alone into the dark to die for a cause no one would know he had served. His ambition, once bent toward power, had turned toward something far greater, and his cunning, once used to rise, was used instead to strike a blow so secret that it went unseen for a lifetime. He asked for no reward and received none, and he sleeps still in the cold water of that hidden cave. And yet the world was changed a little by his choosing, and the green and silver were made a little brighter, whether or not anyone ever knew his name. Not every hero of the greenhouse wore his courage the way a soldier wears a uniform, and not every honorable Slytherin was brave in the loud and obvious way that stories usually celebrate. For some of them were gentle and comfortable and fond of small pleasures, and one of the most memorable of these was a plump and genial old wizard named Horace Slughorn, who was for many years the head of Slytherin House and one of the most beloved and most contradictory teachers the castle ever knew. He was a man who loved comfort the way a cat loves a patch of sun, who delighted in good food and crystallized pineapple and soft armchairs, who filled his rooms with velvet and warmth and pleasant things, and who moved through the world with the unhurried ease of someone who had long ago decided that life was to be savored rather than endured. His great passion, the thing that shaped his whole long career, was the collecting of talented and promising young people. For Horace Slughorn had an unerring eye for those who were destined to become something remarkable, and he loved nothing more than to gather them around him, to nurture them and encourage them, and take a quiet pride in their rising. He kept what everyone called his little club, a circle of favored students chosen for their gifts or their famous families or their evident promise, and he hosted small suppers and gatherings for them. And he took a genuine and glowing pleasure in their company, and in later years he loved to remember that this one had become a great potioneer, and that one had risen high in the government, and another had become a celebrated writer, or a famous player of the wizarding sport, as though each of them were a bright coin he had polished and set carefully upon a shelf. There was vanity in this, certainly, the small, harmless vanity of a man who liked to be near greatness and liked to feel that he had helped it along. And there was self-interest, too, for the favors of his old students flowed back to him in gifts and in useful connections, and he was not ashamed of enjoying them. And yet, when you looked at the whole of it, there was something almost tender in this collecting of bright young lives, for he did not gather them to use them so much as to cherish them, to keep a warm and glowing gallery of promise in his memory, and to feel, in the gathering, a little less alone in a long and comfortable life that might otherwise have been rather empty. Yet it would be a mistake, and an unkind one, to see in Horace Slughorn only a comfortable and self-serving old man. For beneath the softness there ran a current of real feeling, of real warmth toward the young people he taught, and of something that in the end proved to be real conscience as well. He was not cruel, not in the smallest degree, and he did not care in the least about the purity of anyone's blood, for among his most treasured students were those from ordinary families, and those born to no magic at all, and he judged them entirely by their gifts and their kindness, and never by their names. In a house so often accused of prejudice, here was its head of house living quietly by the opposite creed, delighting in talent wherever he found it, and welcoming to his table anyone who shone. And in this alone, he gave a gentle and lasting answer to those who believed that green and silver meant only coldness. But there was a shadow in his long life, a single memory that he carried like a stone in his pocket, and it was the source of the deepest remorse he ever knew. For many years before, when he was younger and even more susceptible to the flattery of a brilliant pupil, he had taught a boy of extraordinary gifts, a boy so charming and so clever that Slughorn had been quite unable to see the darkness growing beneath the charm. And that boy had asked him, one evening, about a certain terrible branch of magic, a way of tearing the soul apart in the pursuit of a false and monstrous kind of immortality. And Slughorn, flattered and unwary, had answered the question, had given the boy a piece of dangerous knowledge that he ought never to have shared, and that boy had grown into the darkest wizard of the age. For the rest of his life, Horace Slughorn was haunted by that conversation, ashamed of it, hiding from it, tampering even with his own memory of it, so that he would not have to face the full weight of what his careless words had helped to set in motion, and in that shame there was proof of a conscience very much alive. For only a man who truly cared could have been so wounded by his own mistake. And so, when the darkness returned to the world, and the war came at last to the very walls of the castle, Horace Slughorn faced the great test of his comfortable life, the test that revealed at last what kind of man lived beneath the velvet and the crystallized pineapple. He had spent so many years avoiding danger, choosing always the soft path and the safe corner, slipping away from trouble the way a wise old animal slips into its burrow, and no one would have been very surprised if he had chosen, in that final hour, to gather his comforts and quietly disappear. But that is not what he did. When the moment came, when the castle he had served for so long stood in real peril, and the young people he loved so dearly were preparing to defend it, Horace Slughorn found within himself something firmer than his fondness for comfort, and he chose to stay, and he chose to fight, standing among the defenders of the school with his wand raised, an old and cautious man, finally spending his courage all at once in the place where it mattered most. There was a kind of quiet redemption in that choice, a settling of the old debt he had carried for so many years, for the same man who had once given a careless answer to a dangerous boy now stood against everything that boy had become, and in doing so he unmade a little of the harm he had always regretted. He did not become brave by ceasing to be himself, for he was frightened still, and cautious still, and fond of comfort until the very end. And yet, he found the courage anyway, in spite of all his fears, which is perhaps the truest kind of courage there is, the courage of a soft heart that acts bravely not because it feels no fear, but because it decides that some things are worth the fear. And this is why Horace Slughorn belongs so firmly among the answers to those who would call Slytherin the evil house, for he was cautious and vain and comfort-loving and imperfect in a dozen gentle ways. And he was also kind and warm and free of prejudice and capable in the end of standing and fighting for what was good. He shows us that the values of the greenhouse need not curdle into cruelty, that ambition can be nothing worse than the harmless wish to be near bright and promising people, that self-preservation can live side by side with a real and tender conscience, and that even a heart grown soft with age and comfort can, when everything is at stake, remember how to be brave. He was not a legend, and he did not want to be one. And yet he mattered, and the castle was safer for his choosing. And somewhere in the memory of the school there is a plump and genial old man who loved his students, regretted his mistakes, and found his courage in the end, and slept, at last, with an easier heart. There is one young Slytherin whose story is so often misread, whose name is so quickly attached to the word villain, that it is worth slowing down and looking at him gently and closely. For his tale is not really the tale of a wicked boy at all, but the far sadder and far more human tale of a child trapped by the weight of a name he never chose. And his name was Draco Malfoy. He was born into wealth and privilege of the oldest and most polished kind, the only son of a family that had been proud and prosperous for many generations, a family that lived in a great and beautiful manor house and moved among the highest circles of wizarding society. And from his earliest days, he was taught carefully and constantly that he was better than others, that his blood was pure, that his family stood above the common run of witches and wizards, and that the world owed him a certain deference simply because of who his ancestors had been. He grew up surrounded by softness and by certainty in equal measure, wanting for nothing that money could provide, and yet quietly starved of the one thing that might have set him free, which was the permission to become someone other than the son his family had already decided he would be. A child believes what he is told, especially when it is told to him by the people he loves and trusts most in all the world. And so Draco arrived at the castle already armored in his family's convictions, already convinced of his own superiority, already fluent in the small cruelties and the casual contempt that had been modeled for him at home. He was arrogant, and he was unkind, and he spent his early school years sneering and boasting and looking down upon those he had been taught to consider beneath him. And it would be easy to stop there and call him simply a nasty boy, but that would be to mistake the surface for the whole. For beneath the arrogance there was a frightened child performing a part he had been handed, straining always to live up to the towering expectations of a proud and demanding father, terrified of disappointing the family whose approval was the whole architecture of his small and sheltered world. The truth of Draco Malfoy began to show itself only when the comfortable certainties of his childhood collapsed around him, when the darkness his family had flirted with for so long came at last into their own house and revealed its true and terrible face. For the dark wizard his family had served returned to power, and he made his headquarters within the walls of the Malfoy home. And suddenly, the grand and glittering cause that Draco had been raised to admire was no longer a distant matter of pride and prejudice, but a living presence at the family table, cruel and capricious and utterly without mercy. And the boy who had boasted so freely found himself face to face with what the boasting had always really meant. His father fell from favor and into disgrace, and the dark wizard, wishing to punish the family and to bind them still more tightly to his will, laid upon Draco himself a monstrous task, a burden no boy of his age should ever have been asked to carry, and told him that he must accomplish it or watch his family destroyed. And so, we come to the true heart of Draco Malfoy's story, which is not a story of villainy at all, but a story of a frightened boy being slowly crushed beneath a weight far too heavy for him. Through that long and dreadful year, he grew pale and thin and hollow-eyed, sleepless and sickened by the thing he had been ordered to do, wandering the castle at night in secret misery, weeping in quiet corners when he believed no one could see, breaking a little more with every passing week beneath the impossible pressure of a task he did not want and could not refuse. The arrogance drained out of him and left only fear and exhaustion in its place, and anyone who looked closely past the old sneer and the family name could see that here was not a monster in the making, but a child in torment, a boy who had been handed a cause he was beginning to understand he did not truly believe in, and a duty he was beginning to realize he did not have the darkness in his heart to carry out. For when at last the decisive moment arrived, the moment toward which that whole terrible year had been driving him, the moment when Draco Malfoy stood with his wand raised and his victim before him, and the chance to do the dreadful deed finally in his hands, he found that he could not do it. He stood there trembling, and he lowered his wand by slow degrees as he spoke, and in the end he simply could not bring himself to commit the murder he had been sent to commit, because whatever his family had taught him, and whatever the darkness had demanded of him, there was something in the boy himself that was not cruel, something that refused, at the final edge, to become a killer. It was not a grand or heroic refusal, and it did not save him from the fear that still surrounded him, and yet it was the truest thing he ever did, the quiet revelation that beneath all the inherited prejudice and all the practiced contempt, Draco Malfoy was, at his center, not a wicked soul, but a lost one. And lost is the right word for him, far better than wicked, for his tragedy was never that he chose evil, but that he had been given so little room to choose anything at all. He was a boy shaped by others before he was old enough to shape himself, taught to be proud before he could learn to be kind, handed a set of beliefs as though they were a family jewel, and expected to wear them without question, and then, when those beliefs turned real and terrible, expected to carry their full and murderous weight upon his young shoulders. That he faltered under that weight is no shame to him, and that he could not, in the end, do the darkest thing asked of him, is quietly to his credit. And when the great struggle finally passed, and the danger lifted, Draco was among those who simply wished to be left alone, to draw his frightened family close and step away from a cause that had brought them nothing but fear. He never became a hero, and he never fully shed the pride he had been raised in, and he remained to the end a flawed and ordinary man rather than a redeemed and shining one, and there is something honest and comforting in that. For most people are neither heroes nor villains, but simply muddling souls, doing their best to escape the mistakes they were born into. His story reminds us that the children of the greenhouse were not born cruel, that even the most privileged and prejudiced of them could carry, hidden beneath the arrogance, a conscience that refused to cross the final line, and that a boy who seemed, from the outside, to be a young villain was really only a frightened child who had never been given the chance to become his own person until the world came crashing down and forced the choice upon him. And when he made that choice, quietly and at the very last, he chose not to kill. And in that small and trembling refusal there was more of the true worth of the house than in all the boasting of his early years, and we may let him rest there. A lost boy who found, at the edge of the dark, that he did not belong to it after all. We have spent this long and gentle night gathering the quieter truths of the greenhouse, the hidden heroes and the tender consciences, and the lost boys who found, at the last, that they did not belong to the dark. And now we must turn, softly and without fear, to look upon the shadow that has followed the house for so long. For it would not be honest to pretend that Slytherin produced no darkness at all. It did produce darkness, and famous darkness, and it is precisely this that has fed the long, unfair judgment against it. And so the question we must ask, calmly and clearly, is not whether darkness ever came out of Slytherin, for it plainly did, but rather how it came, and why, and whether the house itself was the cause of it or merely the soil in which a few poisoned seeds happened to grow. And the answer, when we look at it closely, is a gentle and important one, which is that the tragedy of Slytherin is not that its values are evil, but that its finest values, when love and mercy are stripped away from them, can be turned toward terrible ends by those who choose to turn them. Consider the greatest darkness the house ever produced, the wizard born under the name Tom Riddle, who remade himself into the being who called himself Lord Voldemort. And consider what he was made of, for he was not made of anything the house did not honor in its better children. He was ambitious, deeply and ferociously ambitious, and ambition, as we have said through all these long chapters, is not in itself a wicked thing. For it is the same fire that drives the healer to master her craft, and the inventor to imagine what has never been, and the young student to reach for a greatness she can barely yet see. But in Tom Riddle, the ambition grew without the one thing that keeps ambition human, which is conscience. And an ambition without conscience is a fire without a hearth, a thing that warms nothing and consumes everything. And so, the very drive that might have made him a great and useful wizard made him instead a devourer, hungry for power and for dominion, and finally for the conquering of death itself, willing to tear his own soul into pieces in pursuit of a hollow and joyless immortality. He was ruined not by his ambition, but by his abandonment of everything that ought to temper it, and the house did not teach him that abandonment, for the house held loyalty and love within it too, and he simply chose to want none of them. Consider too the fierce and fanatical loyalty of Bellatrix Lestrange, who gave herself utterly to the dark wizard's cause and served him with a devotion that never wavered. And consider that loyalty, likewise, is not an evil thing, but one of the noblest gifts the greenhouse possesses, the quiet, fierce devotion of serpents, who protect their own through long years and hard seasons. In her, though, loyalty had lost its wisdom and its mercy, had become a blind and burning worship that no longer asked whether the thing it served was worthy of it. And a loyalty that will not ask that question is no longer a virtue at all, but a kind of madness, faithful unto cruelty, devoted unto ruin. She was proof that even the warmest of the house's values, when it is severed from judgment and from kindness, can curdle into something monstrous, not because loyalty is bad, but because loyalty given wholly to a bad cause becomes an instrument of that badness. And so a pattern emerges, softly, from these dark lives, and it is a pattern that ought to comfort us rather than frighten us, for it tells us that the house did not manufacture their cruelty, did not pour it into them as one pours water into a cup. The raw materials of these wizards and witches were the same gifts the house celebrated in its gentlest and best children. The ambition and the cunning and the loyalty and the will to endure. And the difference between the hero and the villain was never in the gifts themselves, but in what was done with them, in whether the one who carried them kept hold of love and mercy or cast them aside. Regulus Black carried ambition and cunning too, and used them to strike a secret blow against the darkness and to die unknown for the good of the world. Severus Snape carried a loyalty as fierce as any that ever burned, and bent it, at terrible cost, toward the protection of a boy and the memory of a love he never abandoned. The same seeds, the same soil, and yet such different harvests, and the whole difference lay in the choosing. Horace Slughorn carried the same fondness for talent and for comfort that might, in a colder heart, have hardened into pure self-interest, and yet he kept his kindness alongside it and found, in the end, the courage to stand and fight. And so again and again we see that the gifts were never the danger, that the danger lived only in what a soul decided to keep and what it decided to throw away, and that the throwing away of conscience and of love was always a choice and never a fate. This is the quiet and steadying truth that lifts the long shadow from the house, that a value is not a destiny, that a gift is not a verdict, that to be born with drive and cleverness and deep devotion is not to be sentenced to greatness nor condemned to cruelty, but simply to be handed a great deal of power and left, as every person is left, to choose what to do with it. The darkness that came out of Slytherin came out of individual souls who made individual choices, who took the fire they were given and let it burn away their conscience, who took the loyalty they were given and poured it into unworthy hands, and their darkness belonged to them, to their own decisions and their own hearts, and not to the 1,000 years of ordinary and honorable students who carried the same gifts and chose otherwise. And there is a mercy in seeing it this way, a mercy for the house and a mercy for ourselves. For we all carry within us the same double possibility, the same gifts that might build or might destroy depending on what we do with them, and none of us is doomed by our nature to become the worst of what we could be. The tragedy of the fallen ones was real, and we do not excuse it or soften it or pretend it away, for the harm they did was terrible, and the choices they made were their own. And yet even in looking honestly at that darkness, we find not a condemnation of the greenhouse, but a lesson for every house and every heart, which is that our finest qualities are the very ones most in need of love and mercy to guide them, and that when those two gentle things are kept close, the fire of ambition warms rather than burns, and the devotion of loyalty shelters rather than destroys. So we may look upon the shadow without fear now, understanding it at last, seeing it for what it truly was, not the fruit of a wicked house, but the choice of wounded souls who let go of the very things that might have saved them. The serpent is still, after all, an ancient symbol of healing and renewal, of the shedding of an old skin and the finding of a new one. And even the darkest chapters of the house's long story point, in the end, toward that same quiet hope that what is turned toward darkness might, by love and mercy, have been turned toward light instead, and that the choice, always and forever, belongs to the one who carries the fire. Of all the wizards who have ever lived, none is remembered with more warmth or more wonder than Merlin. And according to the oldest traditions of the wizarding world, Merlin himself once wore the green and silver of Slytherin house. Let that thought settle over you gently now, the way a soft blanket settles over tired shoulders, for it is a thought that quietly undoes 1,000 years of unfair whispering. The most celebrated wizard in all of legend, the name spoken in blessing and in gratitude for age upon age, is said to have learned his first true magic within the very house that the world so often calls dark. If that is so, and the old stories hold that it is, then the house of the serpent cannot be a nursery of evil, for it gave the world the very measure by which goodness itself has come to be judged. Merlin lived long ago, in the earliest days of remembered magic, in a time when the wizarding world and the world of ordinary folk were still tangled together and had not yet drawn apart. He was a wizard of the deep past, older even than the founders of the castle by the reckoning of some tales, and his memory had already grown vast and golden by the time Salazar Slytherin and his 3 companions raised their school upon the hill. Yet the wizarding world, looking back and wishing to claim its greatest son, placed him among the students of Slytherin. And so the serpent may count among its own the wisest enchanter who ever lived. It is a gentle irony worth resting upon, that the house so often blamed for pride and cruelty should also be the house that shaped the kindest and most generous mind in all of magic. For Merlin was above all a protector of the innocent and a friend to ordinary people. In the stories handed down through the centuries, he did not use his enormous power to lift himself above others or to grind them beneath his heel. He used it instead to guide and to shelter, to counsel kings toward mercy, to defend the weak against the strong, and to weave peace where there might so easily have been ruin. He became a byword for wisdom, which is to say that when later generations wished to praise a wise person, they simply said that the person was as wise as Merlin, and everyone understood at once what was meant. His very name became a kind of blessing, spoken softly in moments of surprise or thanks, a small daily echo of the affection in which he was held. Consider, as you drift and breathe, what this means for the house that claims him. The traits that Slytherin most treasures are ambition, cunning, resourcefulness, and a certain far-seeing patience, and every one of those traits can be found shining in the legend of Merlin. His ambition was the noblest kind, the wish not to seize power, but to shape a better age, to build something lasting and good out of a rough and dangerous world. His cunning was the cleverness of the peacemaker, the ability to see 3 moves ahead and to find the quiet path that spared bloodshed. His resourcefulness let him meet each new trouble with a calm and inventive mind, and his patience let him wait for the right moment rather than rushing headlong into harm. In him, the values of the serpent were turned wholly toward the light, and they made him not a tyrant, but a guardian. It is worth resting for a moment on how rare a thing that is, for power of the kind Merlin held is a dangerous gift, and history is thick with those who let such power sour them into pride and dominion. A wizard able to bend the world to his wishes might so easily have set himself upon a throne and named himself master of lesser folk. And many a lesser figure in the old tales did exactly that and was undone by it. Yet Merlin, holding more strength than almost any who came before or after, chose again and again to bend rather than to break, to shelter rather than to seize, to give his gifts away in service rather than to hoard them for himself. That choosing, made not once but across a whole long life, is the true measure of his greatness, and it is a choosing that any child of the serpent might learn from and take gently to heart. There is an order of merit in the wizarding world named in his honor, the Order of Merlin, given to those who have done great service, and its highest degree is a mark of the deepest respect that wizardkind can offer. That such an honor bears his name tells us everything about how he is remembered, for a society does not name its highest award after a villain. It names it after the one it most wishes to imitate, the one whose example it holds up to its children as the very shape of what a great and good wizard ought to be. And that example, the tradition tells us, first took root in the cool green quiet of the Slytherin common room, beneath the soft light of the lake, among students who were taught to think deeply and to want greatly, and never to give up. It is worth pausing here to notice how easily a single dark chapter can blot out 1,000 bright ones in the memory of a people. The house that produced Merlin also produced, many centuries later, a handful of wizards who turned to cruelty, and it was those few who came to color the whole reputation of the green and silver. Yet if we are honest and gentle with the truth, we must set the wise enchanter of the old legends upon the same scale. And when we do, the balance shifts at once. One protector of the innocent, one friend of ordinary folk, one mind so good that his name became the very word for goodness, weighs a very great deal against the shadows, and it reminds us that the house was never bound to any single ending. The old storytellers did not have to place Merlin in Slytherin. They might have set him anywhere, or nowhere at all. For legends are soft clay that each age shapes to its liking. Yet the tradition chose to make him a serpent, and there is a quiet wisdom in that choice. Perhaps a wish to remind every later generation that ambition and cleverness are not the enemies of virtue, but may be its truest servants. A person who wants greatly and thinks cleverly can do great harm. Yes, but that same person can also do great and lasting good, and the difference lies not in the wanting or the thinking, but in the heart that guides them. Merlin's heart was turned toward mercy, and so all his gifts became gifts to the world. So when you next hear the house of Slytherin spoken of as though it were nothing but a den of dark wizards, you may hold this gentle counterweight in your mind and let it soothe you. The greatest name in wizarding legend, the enchanter whose wisdom lit the earliest ages, the protector whose kindness earned him a place of honor above all others, is said to have been a son of that very house. He shed no innocent blood and sought no cruel throne. He guarded, he counseled, he healed, and he gave. And he did it all with the patience and the far sight and the deep cleverness that the serpent so prizes. The house did not make him good, for goodness is always a choice, but it did not stop him either, and it may well have given him the very tools with which his goodness was built. Let that be enough for now, this soft and steady thought that the wisest and kindest wizard in all the old stories once looked out through the green windows at the slow water of the lake, just as the students of Slytherin have done for 1,000 years since. There is something deeply restful in it, a sense that the world is more forgiving and more full of quiet good than the loud legends would have us believe. The serpent is an old symbol of healing and renewal, of shedding the worn skin and beginning again, and in Merlin, the house found its gentlest and most enduring proof. So breathe slowly now, and let the wise old enchanter watch over your rest as he once watched over the innocent of his age, and let the green light of the lake grow soft and dim as you sink a little deeper towards sleep. There is a moment in the life of every young witch and wizard at the castle when an ancient and battered hat is placed upon the head, and in the quiet of that moment, the hat listens to the mind beneath it and speaks aloud the name of a house. The Sorting Hat is one of the oldest and strangest enchantments in all the wizarding world, older than almost anything else within the castle walls, and it was made by the 4 founders themselves so that their work might carry on long after they were gone. Into it they poured a portion of their own thought and judgment, and so it sees each child not as the world sees them, from the outside, but from within, weighing the shape of the heart and the bent of the will. And when it sings its long song at the start of each year, it tells the gathered school what each house most values, and of Slytherin it sings of the cunning, the ambitious, and the resourceful, those with a great and burning wish to prove themselves and to achieve. Let us think tenderly, as sleep begins to gather at the edges of the night, about what it truly means that the hat sees greatness sleeping in these children. For the hat does not sort by goodness or by wickedness. It does not divide the school into the kind and the cruel, the safe and the dangerous. It sorts instead by the nature of a person's gifts and longings, by the way a mind reaches out toward the world, and when it places a child in Slytherin, it is not passing sentence upon that child's soul. It is simply naming a certain kind of fire, a certain hunger to rise and to matter and to leave a mark, and saying, "Here is a heart that will not easily settle for less than it dreams of." That fire is a form of raw power, the power to shape the future, and the hat honors it by giving it a home among others who share it. Consider how gentle and how fair this really is. Once the old fear is set aside, the hat looks at a small and nervous child, younger than 11 summers, by only a little, and it perceives within that child a great capacity, a seed of something that might one day grow tall and strong. It does not know yet what the seed will become, for that is not the hat's to decide. It knows only that the seed is there, full of potential, waiting for the years and the choices that will call it into flower. And so greatness, in the hat's understanding, is not a finished thing, but a beginning, not a verdict, but a promise. And the promise belongs entirely to the one who carries it forward. A seed of ambition may grow into a healer who never rests until the sick are well, or into an inventor who gives the world some marvel it did not know it needed, or into a leader who guides others gently through hard years. The seed does not choose, the child does. This is the quiet truth that so much of the old prejudice forgets. People hear that Slytherin values those who will use any means to achieve their ends, and they shiver, imagining only the darkest ends and the cruelest means. Yet the words themselves say nothing of the sort. To be willing to use any means is, at its root, to be resourceful, to be undaunted, to refuse to give up simply because the first path is blocked, turned toward a worthy end, and guided by a kind heart. That same determination becomes one of the most beautiful things a person can possess. The refusal to abandon a good cause when it grows difficult, the cleverness to find another way when every open road has closed. The hat sees that determination and calls it greatness, and it is right to do so. For greatness is exactly what such a will may become when love and conscience are there to steer it. Think, too, of how many quiet and honorable lives have passed through the greenhouse without ever troubling the pages of history. For every dark wizard whose name became a byword for fear, there were countless students who wanted greatly and worked hard and used their cleverness and their patience for ordinary, decent ends. They became careful healers and shrewd builders, loyal friends and steadfast parents, wizards who rose in their small worlds not by trampling others, but by refusing to give up on themselves. The hat saw greatness in each of them, and in most of them that greatness grew toward the light, quietly and without fanfare, the way most good things grow. History remembers the storms and forgets the long, calm seasons. Yet it is the calm seasons that hold the truest measure of a house. It is a comfort, too, to remember how tender the whole ceremony really is, for all its ancient strangeness. A frightened child walks the length of a great hall beneath the gaze of the whole gathered school, and sits upon a small stool, and feels the old hat lowered gently onto the brow, and in that instant is understood more truly than perhaps ever before. The hat does not scold and does not shame. It searches with a kind of patient care through the tangle of a young mind, past the nervousness and the hope and the half-formed dreams, until it finds the true grain of the heart, and then it speaks a single word that is not a judgment but a welcome. To be placed in Slytherin is to be told, in effect, that one belongs among the striving and the clever and the deeply loyal. And there is warmth in that belonging, a sense of having been seen and named and gathered in rather than cast out. Many a child who feared the sorting has found in it instead the first true home they ever knew, a place among others who understood the fire they carried and did not flinch from it. There is a kind of mercy, as well, in the way the hat sometimes listens to a child's own wishes. It is said that a heart set firmly against a certain path will be heard, and that a child who truly does not wish to walk the way of the serpent may be placed elsewhere. This tells us that nothing about the sorting is a cage. The hat offers a home suited to the nature it perceives, but it does not chain anyone to a fate, and the choices that follow the sorting matter far more than the single word spoken on that first evening. A child sorted into Slytherin is not sealed away from goodness any more than a child sorted elsewhere is guaranteed it. Each is handed a set of gifts and a lifetime in which to choose what to do with them. So the hat sees greatness in the ambitious and the cunning and the resourceful, because greatness truly does sleep there, coiled and waiting like the serpent upon the emerald crest, full of the power to shape whatever comes next. It is a power without a moral direction of its own, a strength that may be bent toward mercy or toward cruelty, toward building or toward breaking. And the whole story of a Slytherin life is the story of which way that strength is bent. The hat does not decide it. The founders did not decide it. The house itself does not decide it. It is decided, slowly and quietly, in 10,000 small choices across the years, by the one who carries the seed. Let this thought carry you gently now toward rest. There is something deeply soothing in the idea that greatness is only a beginning, that the seed within each ambitious heart is neither good nor evil until a whole life has answered the question of what it will become. It means that no child is ever lost simply for being clever or for wanting greatly, and it means that the house of the serpent has always been a house of possibility rather than of doom. The old hat, worn and wise and stitched through with the thought of the four who made it, has never once condemned a single child. It has only ever named a fire and offered it a home, and then left the rest, tenderly, to the years. So let your own thoughts grow soft and slow, and let the last of the day's cares drift downward into the quiet, and rest now in the gentle knowledge that potential is a kindly thing, forever waiting, forever open, forever free to grow toward the light. And so at last the old question returns to us, softly now, in the deep quiet of the night. The question that has followed the green and silver for 1,000 years and that gave this gentle story its very name. Is Slytherin the evil house? We have wandered far together to arrive here, through the founding and the founder, through the long quarrel and the true values, down into the cool common room beneath the lake and out again into the light of the hidden heroes. And now, with all of that behind us, we may answer the question plainly and kindly, and let the answer soothe us like a hand smoothing a worn and troubled brow. No, Slytherin is not the evil house. It never was. It is the house of drive and cleverness and deep and quiet loyalty, and it has given the world heroes as well as villains, and far more ordinary good souls than either. Let us hold that answer gently and turn it over, the way you might turn a smooth stone in your palm until it grows warm. The belief that Slytherin is evil was never built upon the whole truth. It was built upon a handful of dark names, spoken so loudly and remembered so long that they drowned out the countless quiet ones. It was built upon the old quarrel between Salazar and Godric, a disagreement grown monstrous in the retelling. It was built upon fear, which always reaches for a simple story, a single house to blame, a single color to distrust, so that the frightened mind may feel it has understood the shape of danger. Yet the truth of any house of children across 1,000 years can never be simple. And the simple story was never the honest one. For consider all that we have found. We found in ambition not cruelty, but the quiet fire behind every discovery and every act of daring, the refusal to settle for less than one might become. We found in cunning not treachery, but foresight and cleverness, the gift of finding the hidden path when the open road is closed, a gift that has saved as many lives as any bravery. We found beneath the cold reputation a loyalty so deep that outsiders rarely noticed it, a devotion that stood by friends and family through long and bitter years. We found in self-preservation not cowardice, but a kind of wisdom, the sense to wait and to endure, and so to keep the chance of doing good another day. These are not the marks of an evil house. They are the marks of a house of survivors and strategists and steadfast hearts, and they are woven all through the noblest stories the green and silver ever told. And we found the hearts themselves, did we not? The ones the loud legend had forgotten. We found Severus Snape, who carried a hidden courage beneath a cold surface and served in secret at terrible risk, guarding a boy for the sake of a love he never set down. We found Regulus Black, who turned against the darkness alone and unseen and gave his life to begin its undoing, leaving only 2 small initials behind. We found Horace Slowhorn, comfortable and cautious and fond of his own ease, who nonetheless found his courage in the end and chose to stand and fight for the castle. We even found young Draco, more lost than wicked, a boy trapped by the weight of a name he never chose, who at the last could not bring himself to kill. And beyond them all we found Merlin, wisest and kindest of enchanters, the protector of the innocent whose name became the very word for goodness. These are the children of Slytherin too, and there are far more like them, quiet and unrecorded, than there ever were villains. It is true, and we must say it tenderly and without flinching, that the house has known real darkness. Tom Jedusor, who unmade himself into Lord Voldemort, was an heir of Slytherin, and Bellatrix Lestrange gave her fierce loyalty to a monstrous cause. Yet even here, the honest answer clears the house of the crime. For their cruelty was not born of the green and silver. It was born of their own choices, of ambition stripped of conscience and loyalty stripped of wisdom, of gifts that might have grown toward the light left instead to curdle in the absence of love and mercy. The house gave them the seed, as it gives every child a seed. But the house did not choose what they grew it into. They did. The tragedy of Slytherin is only that its finest values, turned away from kindness, can be bent toward ruin. And that tragedy is the tragedy of every human gift, for there is no strength in all the world that cannot be misused. So the darkness was real, but it was never the whole, and it was never the house itself. A handful of villains cannot define 1,000 years of students, most of whom lived their lives quietly and honorably, and are remembered by no one but those who loved them. To let the few dark names stand for the whole is to make the same tired mistake that fear always makes. And we may set that mistake down now, gently, and leave it behind us in the dark where it can trouble us no longer. The green and silver do not stand for evil. They stand for potential, for the great and gentle things a life may yet become. And potential belongs to no single ending. It is open. It is free. It is, in its own quiet way, a kind of hope. It helps, too, to see how the unfair story first took hold and grew. For once we understand a fear, we may more easily set it down. The prejudice against the green and silver did not appear all at once, but gathered slowly across the centuries, fed drop by drop by the dark deeds of a few, and by the long, stubborn memory of the founders' quarrel. Because some famous dark wizards came from the house, people began, without quite noticing the leap they made, to believe that the darkness was the house itself, as though the color of a banner could carry cruelty the way a cup carries water. Whispers passed from year to year hardened into certainties, and certainties into something almost like a law of nature, until at last a small child in green might be distrusted before ever speaking a word, judged not for anything done, but only for where the old hat had placed a striving heart. Seen plainly, in the calm of the night, the whole machinery of that fear looks fragile and sad, a great weight of suspicion balanced upon so slender a handful of names, and it cannot bear the honest testing we have given it here. There is such peace in this answer, once we truly let it in. For if the house of the serpent is not evil, then no child was ever doomed by wearing its colors, and no clever, ambitious, striving heart was ever fated for the dark, simply for being clever and ambitious and striving. The world is not so cruelly arranged. It leaves the choosing to us, always, and it fills even its most whispered about corners with far more ordinary goodness than the legends ever allowed. That is a restful thing to know, as the night grows deep, that the shadows we feared were mostly stories, and that behind the stories stood 1,000 years of students, most of them kind, most of them quiet, most of them simply trying, as we all are, to become something worthy of the gifts they were given. So let the old question settle now, answered and at rest, and let its answer settle with it, soft and sure. Slytherin is not the evil house. It is the house of drive and cleverness and deep loyalty, the house of Snape and Regulus and Slughorn, of Merlin the Wise and the countless unnamed good, a house whose colors mean not menace but possibility. The serpent upon the crest was always a symbol of healing and renewal, of the old skin shed and the new life begun, and in that gentle sign the truth of the house was written all along. There is nothing left now to fear in the green and silver, and nothing left to prove. Let the question dissolve like mist upon the lake, and let your breathing slow, and let yourself drift a little further into the warm and forgiving dark, where all the old shadows have finally been laid to rest. And so we let the story settle, here beneath the soft green light of the lake, where the water moves slowly overhead, and the lanterns glow low and warm in the quiet of the common room. There is nothing more to explain now, and nothing more to understand, only the gentle after-calm that comes when a long tale has been fully told and every question laid to rest. You have wandered far tonight, through 1,000 years of the house of the serpent, and now the wandering is done, and there is only this stillness left, cool and green and kind. A place to set down the last of your thoughts and let them drift away upon the slow water. Let the names grow soft in your mind now, the way lantern light grows soft and blurred when the eyes are heavy and nearly closed. Salazar Slytherin, the scholar who valued cleverness and foresight, and the old quarrel that fell like a long shadow over his house and was never quite what the legends made of it. The true values, ambition and cunning and loyalty and the quiet wisdom of endurance. Each one a fire that may warm as easily as it may burn. The emerald crest and the silver serpent, the ancient sign of healing and renewal, of the worn skin shed and the new life begun. Let each of these settle and fade, gently, one by one, like leaves coming to rest upon the surface of a still pond, until there is nothing left to hold and nothing left to carry. Let the faces soften too, the hidden hearts we found together in the green. Snape, whose courage hid beneath a cold surface, brave to the very end for the sake of a love he never released. Regulus, who turned in secret against the dark and gave everything to begin its undoing, unseen and unthanked for long years. Slughorn, who found in the end that even a cautious and comfortable heart may rise and stand and fight. Draco, more lost than wicked, a boy who could not in the end become the thing he had been raised to be. And Merlin, wisest and gentlest of all, the protector of the innocent, whose kindness became the measure of all goodness. Let them rest now, every one, as you are resting, warm and safe and quiet in the deep green light. Let the places soften as well, all the quiet corners of the story where we lingered together. The great castle upon its hill, ancient and patient, holding 1,000 years of children within its warm stone walls. The cool green common room deep beneath the water, where the windows glow with the soft light that filters down through the lake, and the low chairs and the still lanterns make a shelter far from the noise of the world above. The hidden chamber that was only ever a whisper and a story, sealed and quiet, and the castle that survived it whole. Let each of these settle into the gentle dark, no longer a thing to picture, but only a warmth remembered. The way a room you loved as a child stays with you long after you have left it, soft and dim and kind. There is no need to hold any of it clearly now. Let it all grow blurred and easy, and let it drift. And let the old values drift with the rest, gentled now and stripped of every fear. Ambition, which we found to be only the quiet fire that refuses to settle for less, no longer a thing to dread, but almost a thing to cherish. Cunning, which we found to be foresight and cleverness, the finding of the hidden path, a gift that has saved as many as any bravery ever did. Loyalty, deep and quiet and fierce, the standing by one's own through long and difficult years. And the wisdom of endurance, the knowing when to wait and when to yield, so that the chance to do good is kept alive for another day. These were never the marks of evil. They were only the marks of a striving and steadfast heart. And now, in the hush of the night, they may rest as gently as everything else, their long defense finished, their truth quietly won. There is nothing left to prove tonight, and nothing left to fear. The old question has been answered, softly and surely, and the answer needs no further guarding. The house of the serpent was never the house of evil, and the green and silver were always the colors of potential, of the great and gentle things a life may yet become. You may let even that thought loosen its hold now, for it has done its quiet work, and you need carry it no further into the night. It will still be true in the morning, and truer still each time you return to it, and it asks nothing of you now but that you rest. Notice how the night has gathered close around you now, soft and dark and safe, holding you the way the deep water holds the still room beneath the lake. All the long day is behind you, and every task and every worry that seemed so large by the light has grown small and distant and quiet, dissolving one by one into the gentle dark like ripples smoothing away upon a pond until the surface lies perfectly still. There is nothing more that this night asks of you. You have listened, and you have wandered, and you have laid an old unfairness gently to rest, and now the only thing left to do is the easiest thing of all, which is simply to let go, to sink, to rest. Let your thoughts grow slow and few, and let even those few begin to drift apart and fade until the mind itself is as calm and dim as the green room beneath the water. Feel how heavy and how calm your body has grown, sinking gently into the warmth beneath you, as though you too were settling into a low chair in that still room beneath the lake, watching the slow greenish light waver on the walls. Your breathing has grown slow and even, in and out, like the deep and patient breath of the castle itself as it sleeps upon its hill. All through the great stone halls the fires are burning low, and in every house the students are dreaming, Gryffindor and Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw and Slytherin alike. All of them at peace, all of them resting as one beneath the same wide and quiet sky. There is no quarrel now among the houses, and no fear, only the shared and gentle stillness of a world grown soft with sleep. The serpent sheds its old skin and is renewed, and the lake lies calm and dark above the sleeping room, and the castle rests as it has rested through 1,000 quiet nights. Let yourself rest with it now. Let the last of the day drift away from you like mist lifting from still water at the coming of the dawn, unhurried, weightless. Gone, there is nowhere you need to be and nothing you need to do. Only this slow and easy breath. Only this warm and gathering quiet. Only the deep green calm settling over you like a blanket drawn up in the dark. Let each breath carry you a little further down into that calm, softer and slower than the last, until the words themselves begin to blur and fall away, and there is only the gentle hush of your own resting mind. The story is finished, and it was a kind one, and it asked nothing of you but that you listen for a while and let your cares grow light. Now even the listening may end. Let the green light dim, and let the lantern glow fade, and let the slow water close its quiet over the last of your waking thoughts, and drift, softly and safely, into the deep and peaceful dark of sleep. And so our slow journey through the House of the Serpent comes gently to its close. We wandered from Salazar Slytherin and the founding of the school, through the real values of ambition and cunning and quiet loyalty, down into the cool green common room beneath the lake, and past the old prejudice that never told the whole truth. We met the hidden heroes, brave Snape and faithful Regulus, kind and cautious Slughorn, and lost young Draco. And we remembered even Merlin, wisest of them all. The green and silver, we found, stand not for evil, but for potential, for the great and gentle things that a life may yet become. There is nothing left now that you must remember, and nothing left that you must understand. You may let every name and every image soften and fade, the way lantern light fades on still water. Your breathing is slow. Your body is warm and heavy and safe. The castle sleeps, and the lake is calm, and the serpent rests in its renewal. Let the last of your thoughts drift quietly away, and let yourself sink softly into the deep green quiet of sleep. Good night. Rest well, and whenever you wish for another gentle story beneath the stars, you are always welcome to return.